fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to lead the delegation of the Chinese government to attend the fourth cycle of the Universal Periodic Review of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The UPR is an important platform for countries to conduct equal-footed and candid exchanges and engage in constructive dialogue and cooperation. The Chinese government attaches high importance to this UPR cycle. We have set up an interdepartmental working group made up of nearly 30 agencies and prepared the National Human Rights Report after broadly soliciting comments and suggestions from social organizations, academic institutions, and the general public. Today, the Chinese government delegation, composed of representatives of over 20 ministries and the government of Xizang Autonomous Region, Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, and the Macau Special Administrative Region, is here in Geneva to attend the review with a sincere hope to conduct dialogue on the basis of equality and mutual respect, promote exchanges and mutual learning, draw on each other's strength, and make common progress. Mr. President, China upholds respect for and protection of human rights as a task of importance in state governance. We have embarked on a path of human rights development that is in keeping with the trend of the times and appropriate to China's national conditions, and scored historic achievements in this process. We uphold the people-centered philosophy and strive to deliver a better life for all the people. A happy life for people is the ultimate human rights. China sees people's aspiration for a better life as the focus of its efforts. After 8 years of continued hard work, we have lifted nearly 100 million people out of poverty, eradicated absolute poverty once and for all, and achieved moderate prosperity in all respects. China has met the targets of poverty eradication set out in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda 10 years ahead of schedule. We have taken solid steps to promote high-quality development and build the world's largest education, social security, and healthcare systems. The people's sense of fulfillment, happiness, and security has grown stronger. China has worked to advance the Peaceful China Initiative and the rule of law, and is widely recognized as one of the safest countries in the world. We uphold the role of people as the principal subject and ensure that people are the masters of the country, of the society, and their own future. China has been developing whole process people's democracy. The Chinese people engage in democratic elections, consultations, decision-making management, and oversight, and participating in various ways in the management of state affairs in accordance with the law. Opinions are extensively solicited from various sectors and fully heeded in all the major decisions made by the party and the Chinese government. In this process, people's right to information, participation, expression, and oversight are safeguarded. China ensures respect for and protection of human rights throughout all aspects of legislation, law enforcement, administration of justice, and compliance of the law. We have strengthened the institution of legal safeguards for human rights and ensure that people can enjoy various rights as prescribed by the law. Since the last cycle, China has promulgated 51 new laws and revised 113 existing ones. We uphold the equality of human rights and strive to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to bring out their best. No one is left out or left behind as China builds a modern socialist country in all respects. The people of all 56 ethnic groups of China are equal and closely united like the seeds of the pomegranate, working together for common prosperity and development and for a better life for all. Chinese citizens' freedom of religious belief is safeguarded. There are nearly 200 million religious believers in China, and different religions exist in harmony. China has formulated a number of documents outlining the development of women and children, revised the law on protection of rights and interests of women, and promoted gender equality and all-round development of women and children. People with disabilities in China have been fully supported in their rehabilitation, education, employment, and cultural enrichment. Over 90% of China's elderly population receive home-based or community-based elderly care. The 15-minute elderly care service cycle has been improved. We continue to write new chapters of human rights development in the process of China's modernization. We made solid efforts to promote common prosperity for over 1.4 billion Chinese people and ensure that modernization brings more benefits to everyone in a more equitable way. We are committed to promoting all-round development of people and ensuring both material abundance and cultural ethical enrichment of the people. According to the principle that clear waters and green mountains are just as valuable as gold and silver, we are accelerating green development and advancing the Beautiful China initiative. China has now close to half of the world's installed photovoltaic capacity. Over half of the world's new energy vehicles run on roads in China, and China contributes to 1/4 of the increased area of forestation in the world. We are committed to a path of peaceful development and strive to contribute China's strength to the global human rights cause. Keep in mind the future of humanity and the well-being of the people. China works to build a community with a shared future of mankind to make the world a better place. China has put forward the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, offering its insight on how to address development deficit, break the security dilemma, and strengthen mutual learning among civilizations. Over the past 10 years, the Belt and Road Initiative has become a fine example of promoting development through cooperation and advancing human rights through development. The BRI has helped to create 420,000 jobs in BRI partner countries and can help to lift 7.6 million people out of extreme poverty and 32 million people out of moderate poverty. By 2030, we have actively participated in global human rights governance in multilateral human rights bodies, including the Human Rights Council. We are committed to safeguarding international fairness and justice. We have conducted human rights dialogues with over 30 countries and regions and work tirelessly to advance human rights exchanges and cooperation and promote the sound development of international human rights cause. Mr. President, fellow delegates, in human rights protection, no one can claim to be perfect because there is always room for improvement. Facts have shown that the path chosen by the Chinese people for its human rights development suits its national conditions and meets people's aspirations. It is a path that we'll steadfastly follow. However, China is still a developing country with over 1.4 billion people. Imbalances and inadequacies in developments remain a prominent problem, and human rights protection faces many difficulties and challenges. To better promote and protect human rights, my government will implement 30 new measures in the fields of legislation and administration of justice, people's well-being, high-quality development, protection of rights and interests of special groups, climate change, and international cooperation in human rights. Let me just cite a few examples in the interests of time. We will continue to improve people's well-being. We will ensure more equitable access to basic public services, improve rural housing conditions, better protect the rights and interests of workers in new forms of employment and low-paying jobs, as well as women, children, people with disabilities, and the elderly. We will also work actively to address the negative impact of climate change. We'll continue to strengthen legal safeguards for human rights. We will formulate and improve legislation on preschool education, social assistance, and charity, and deepen the comprehensive and integrated reform of the judicial system. A new periodical national action plan on human rights will be formulated and implemented. We will actively promote international cooperation on human rights. We will encourage different parties to follow the principle of extensive consultation and joint contribution for shared benefits in improving global human rights governance, work together to address human rights challenges and promote the equal enjoyment of human rights. China will hold commemorative events to mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Fourth World Conference on Women and promote international cooperation in the Beautiful Crafts Workshop project to help women with disabilities from different countries to find employment and start business. China will host an international forum on human rights to promote dialogue and cooperation among different parties and strengthen exchange and mutual learning. We will continue to support the work of the UN human rights bodies. We'll continue to promote dialogue and cooperation in the Council to uphold human rights with security, promote human rights with development, and advance human rights with cooperation. China will strengthen exchange and cooperation with the High Commissioner's Office and will donate $1 million in 2024 to support its setting up a knowledge hub on economic, social, and cultural rights. In cooperation with the office, this year we're going to help train 50 professionals from developing countries on economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, please allow me to invite the two deputy heads of the Chinese delegation, Mr. Chang Kuo-ki from the Hong Kong SAR and Mr. Chong Wen-chung from the Macau SAR, to brief the meeting on human rights protection in Hong Kong and Macau, respectively. And in the following interactive dialogue, my delegation will take questions from participating countries in a candid manner, including questions received beforehand from the rapporteur countries. We also look forward to hearing your insights and suggestions on developing China's human rights cause. I thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, since the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region in 1997, the principle of one country, two systems has been the cornerstone of our long-term prosperity and stability. This successful national policy ensures that our unique strengths are maintained while serving the fundamental interests of our country. With the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law and an improved electoral system, the days of social disturbance and fear are now over. Stability as well as law and order has been restored, and our city is back on track. Our people can continue to enjoy the legitimate rights and freedoms guaranteed by our country's constitution, the Basic Law, as well as the relevant provisions of international covenants that apply to Hong Kong. The rule of law is a cornerstone and a core value of Hong Kong's success. Our common law system and independent exercise of judicial power are protected by the Basic Law. Our judiciary is well regarded internationally. Being a market-oriented, open, and international economy underpinned by the rule of law, Hong Kong has exactly what it takes to be a successful global city. At the same time, we are dedicated to making our city a better place for everyone. Through targeted policies in various areas such as housing, child and youth development, healthcare, and economic development, we strive to foster a cohesive and caring community underpinned by a vibrant economy. Mr. President, with unwavering support from our country and a unique one country, two systems formula, Hong Kong will continue to prosper as the city where the global advantage and the China advantage converge. Thank you.
主席先生，
Mr. President, the Basic Law of the Macau Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China, the international human rights conventions applicable to Macau SAR, and local laws together constitute the legal framework for the protection of human rights in Macau. Under the framework of one country, two systems principle and the Basic Law, the Macau SAR enjoys executive, legislative, and independent judicial power, including that of final adjudication. The Macau residents enjoy a wide range of rights and freedoms guaranteed by the law. Since the last round of review, the Macau SAR has committed to promote the protection of human rights. Major legislation and measures include the amendment of the legal framework of the judiciary to ensure judicial efficiency and to safeguard residents' rights of access to the law, the restructuring of a commission for disciplinary control of the security forces and to make it an external independent supervisory body and expand its oversight power, the promulgation of the law on minimum wage for employees to ensure the basic income guarantee for residents and non-resident employees, the amendment of the labor relation to increase the number of days of maternity leave and to introduce paternity leave, the amendment of the two-tier social security system, namely introducing non-mandatory central provident fund system on the basis of basic social security. We have also conducted human rights trainings with the non-governmental organizations. Over the past 25 years since the handover of Macau to the motherland, Macau has achieved leapfrog development in various fields, and the living standard of its people have improved substantially. With the support of the central government, the Macau SAR will fully implement the one country, two system principles and the Basic Law, accelerate the development of moderate economic diversification, and ensure Macau's long-term prosperity and stability. In the meantime, the Macau SAR will continue to optimize the legal systems on human rights protection, implement international human rights conventions in a better way to upgrade the level of human rights protection in Macau. I thank you.
I thank you, Ambassador Chen, and your delegation for these statements. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and friends, we shall now begin our interactive dialogue. Before giving the floor to delegations for their questions and comments, I would like to remind you that the speaking time will be 45 seconds for all, and I would like please to call you for respecting fully this time, given the long list of speakers we do have this morning, over 160. So please be comprehensive toward the presidency for gesturing our dialogue. I wish to reiterate that issues of a political, bilateral, and territorial nature should be kept out of our deliberations. Moreover, United Nations terminology should be used when referring to state and territories. Please be reminded that only the use of the word recommend or recommendation will ensure that the relevant parts of your statements are included in the recommendations section of the working group report. Also, allow me also to recall that the Human Rights Council strongly rejects any act of intimidation or reprisal against individuals and groups who cooperate or have cooperated with the United Nations and its representative and mechanism in the field of human rights. We will now, as said before, begin with the list of speakers, and I give the floor as first speaker to the delegation of Bhutan. You have the floor, Bhutan.
Bhutan welcomes the delegation and thanks the delegation for the report. We welcome the adoption of the National Action Plan for Human Rights and the enactment of laws such as the Civil Code, the Legal Aid Law, and the Personal Information Protection Law. We commend the significant progress in poverty alleviation and the achievement of the poverty reduction target of the 2030 Agenda ahead of schedule. We also note the efforts in strengthening the rights of women, children, elderly, and the disabled. We would like to recommend China the following. 1. Continue efforts in poverty alleviation with particular focus on bridging the gap between rural and urban areas. 2. Continue to improve reproductive and mental health care services. And 3. Continue to strengthen the social security system in rural areas. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam, for Bhutan. Now the floor is for Bolivia.
Gracias,
Ambassador.
Presidente.
Thank you, President. A warm welcome to the distinguished delegation of China. We thank them for the presentation of the fourth national report. We commend the significant progress that has been made and China's constructive involvement with the UPR process. Bolivia has the following respectful recommendations. 1. To continue reducing development gaps between urban and rural areas and between regions, and including equal access to employment and education. Secondly, to continue making progress on its efforts to combat deforestation. Thirdly, to consolidate the results achieved and ensure access to education and the fight against school dropout. We wish China successful UPR.
The floor is for Botswana.
Mr. President, Botswana warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China to the fourth cycle of the UPR process. We thank the delegation for the presentation of their comprehensive national report. Botswana commends the government of China for the commitment and progress made in the promotion, protection, and respect for human rights through the completion of all set goals and tasks in the National Human Rights Action Plan 2016 to 2020. We further note the progress made in the implementation of the current National Human Rights Action Plan 21 to 2025. We, however, note the gaps such as inadequate participation of children living with disabilities with respect to issues affecting their rights and limited access to education. Botswana therefore invites China to consider the following recommendations. 1. To consider strategies that ensure that consultation process for the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities are child-friendly, transparent, and respectful to freedom of expression to enhance participation of children with disabilities. 2. Formulate a comprehensive action
Thank
plan
you, sir. The floor now is for Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. We praise China for ratifying the 2013 Marrakesh Treaty, as we recommended in 2018. Brazil commends China for its efforts in the pursuit of development towards the eradication of poverty, expansion, and improvement of education and health system for all, and the provision of adequate housing. We encourage efforts towards the ratification of the ICCPR. In a constructive spirit, Brazil recommends that China, 1, accelerate efforts to promote the rights of other persons, addressing discrimination and guaranteeing their rights to independent lives, social protection, and appropriate care, and 2, stop the application of a death penalty as punishment for nonviolent criminal offenses, to take measures for a moratorium on the application of capital punishment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Brunei Darussalam.
Mr. President, Brenda Darusman thanks the delegation of China for the presentation and positive notes efforts made by the Chinese government to implement recommendations from the previous cycle. Particularly on economic and social rights, we are pleased to note that the Chinese government has achieved the poverty reduction target of the 2030 agenda 10 years ahead of schedule and are working to improve children's welfare. Brenda Darusman proposes 2 recommendations. 1, continue to intensify efforts for the implementation of the SDGs, especially those related to education. And 2, further strengthen initiatives in the protection of the rights of children and the youth. Mr. President, we wish China successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Floor is for Bulgaria.
Mr. President, Bulgaria acknowledges that since the third UPR cycle, China has enacted a number of new laws and revised existing laws with the aim to improve the protection of human rights and has eliminated absolute poverty, thus achieving the 2030 Agenda Poverty Reduction target. We know the implementation of China's 4th National Human Rights Action Plan for 2021-25 and encourage China to take additional measures to ensure respect for the freedom of thought, expression, and religion, as well as to improve the civil society environment. Bulgaria recommends the following to China. 1, take further steps to increase women's representation in the legislature, public administration, and judiciary. And 2, consider adopting a comprehensive strategy and, where appropriate, introduce legislation to ensure high-quality, inclusive education for all children with disabilities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Le Burkina Faso, vous avez...
I give the floor to Burkina Faso. Thank you, President. Burkina Faso extends a cordial welcome to the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We thank them for the presentation of the 4th UPR report. We commend China on its efforts to establish a robust education system and to consolidate results from the fight against poverty through education. We have the following respectful recommendations. 1, to improve the public healthcare policy. Secondly, to continue to implement continuous learning projects and upskilling initiatives. Thirdly, to improve the generation capacity of wind power and solar power so as to fight against pollution. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to Burundi. Thank you, President. A cordial welcome to the Chinese delegation. You can count on Burundi's support for your review. My delegation recognizes the success in your efforts to implement the strategy against poverty, as well as efforts to reduce social inequalities, to ensure social security, public health care, education, housing assistance, and job assistance. We reaffirm that access to livelihoods is essential in order to uphold human rights. Burundi makes 2 recommendations. 1, to improve access to public health in the central regions and in rural areas, to support Hong Kong and Macau in taking more effective measures to ensure the well-being of their residents in the fields of housing, employment, and healthcare.
Ambassador of Cabo Verde.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cabo Verde delegation thank and congratulate China for its efforts in implementing the recommendation from the 3rd cycle of the UPR, in particular the results obtained in the fight to eradicate poverty. In a constructive spirit, Cabo Verde recommends the following: strengthening the role of the community-level governments and social self-governing organizations in handling public complaints, continue to carry out action to improve rural living environments, continue to accelerate the building of a housing system featuring multiple suppliers and various channels of support that encourage both housing renters and purchase. Wish China every success in its UPR.
Thank you. The floor is for Cambodia, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cambodia warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of the People's Republic of China. We commend efforts made by China in achieving UN 2030 Agenda Poverty Alleviation goal ahead of schedule and significantly contributing global poverty reduction and human development. In constructive spirit, we recommend the following. First, take additional steps to enhance agricultural science and technology innovation system and broaden access to agricultural technology service through innovative approach. Second, continue effort to effectively improve worker skill, elevate employment quality and income level. Finally, I wish the delegation of China a successful review.
Merci. Je donne la parole au Cameroun.
I give the floor to Cameroon.
Ambassador.
Cameroon congratulated the delegation of China of the presentation of its national report and commend its effort to promote human rights, in particular its commitment to narrowing the development gap between urban and rural areas and equal employment on urban and rural workers. In constructive spirit, my delegation would like to make the following recommendation. One, continue to combat pollution illegal targeted in scientific manner to guarantee people right to healthy environment. Two, continue to encourage Chinese business to abide by UN guiding principle on business and human rights in their trade and investment, to conduct the due diligence of human rights and fulfill their social responsibility to respect and promote human rights. Three, accelerate the expansion of urban schools and ensure equal access to basic public education services for children of the rural migrant population. Wish the Chinese delegation full success of Universal Periodic Review. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Canada. Mrs. Ambassador.
Thank you. Canada recommends that China, one, implement the recommendations set out by the CSCR and CEDAW, end all coercive measures imposed on Uyghurs, Tibetans, and other ethnic minorities, including forced labor, coercive labor transfers, forced sterilizations, and mandatory residential schools. Two, ensure Hong Kong upholds its obligations under the ICCPR. Three, repeal the current national security law in Hong Kong and discontinue all cases against individuals charged for exercising their human rights and freedoms. Four, end all forms of enforced disappearances targeting human rights defenders, ethnic minorities, and Falun Gong practitioners. And five, grant the UN, including the OHCHR and special procedures, full and unfettered access to all regions of China, including Tibet and Xinjiang. Canada also notes with concern the increasing extraterritorial repression of human rights defenders, and we wish China's delegation a successful UPR.
Thank you. Je donne la parole au...
I call on Central African Republic. Thank you, President. Chad welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China, and we congratulate you on presenting the national report to the fourth cycle. Significant progress has been made in implementing international obligations to combat forced labor. In the spirit of constructive spirit, we have the following recommendations. One, to continue implementing policies to combat poverty and intergenerational poverty, and also to promote ecological and environmental services and train in this area. We wish you every success in this review. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam. Central African Republic, is the delegation in the room? If you are, you have the floor. President, the CAR welcomes the Chinese delegation and congratulates the Chinese government on the improvements to the legal system and the mechanism to implement the law to protect older persons, and also considerable progress on the legal protection of older persons' rights. We have the following recommendations. One, to continue to improve communication and cooperation between developing countries in the area of protecting older persons. Two, continue to respond to the challenges posed by the aging of the population, and to improve the rights of older persons in general. We wish the Chinese delegation a successful UPR. Thank you.
Chile.
Señor
President, we thank China for presenting the national report, and we congratulate you on amending the law on protecting the rights and interests of women. Recommendations: one, to provide a safe, enabling environment for human rights defenders to go about their work, safeguards and protocols for women to not be subjected to contraception against their will, and promote the rights of sexual identity and gender different groups in the next plan. Thank you very much. Also, a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its abolition. Thank you. Colombia welcomes the distinguished delegation of the People's Republic of China for the fourth cycle of the UPR. We wish you every success in your review. We welcome China's progress in human rights since the last cycle of the UPR. In a constructive spirit, we have the following recommendations. One, consider a moratorium on applying the death penalty. Two, to make further progress on your measures to combat gender gaps, particularly in the areas of employment, the wage gap, and access to higher education. And 3, ratify the main outstanding international human rights instruments. Thank you. Thank you. The Comoros has the floor. Thank you, President. The national report presented by China reflects the huge interest of the country in human rights. After having accepted almost all recommendations in the last cycle and following cooperation with UN human rights entities, reflect the commitment to defending and promoting human rights. In particular, we hail actions for ethnic minorities to foster their development through education and training in particular. Lastly, we recommend that China, which has become a very attractive country for high-level researchers, to strengthen the laws on the stay and conditions for these people. Wish you every success. Thank you. The floor goes to Congo. Thank you, President. Since the previous cycle, China has made significant progress thanks to continuing efforts to protect and promote human rights, notably through promoting the rights to education and health. In a constructive spirit, we have the following recommendations. 1, to achieve the aims of the National Human Rights Action Plan for 2021-2025. 2, to step up efforts to ensure food security by increasing farming production and improving supply chains. Lastly, Congo wishes China every success in its UPR. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Costa Rica, you have the floor. If not, then we move to la parole est à la Côte d'Ivoire.
I call on Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you, President. Côte d'Ivoire bids a warm welcome to the Chinese delegation and congratulates it on efforts to meet its international obligations to promote and protect human rights through drawing up and implementing national human rights plans. The Ivorian government, in a constructive spirit, would like to make the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the International Convention to protect all persons from enforced disappearance. 2, step up efforts to close development gaps for women in urban and rural areas and across regions, and to promote women's development in line with the country's social and economic development. Taking it further, we wish China every success.
Mr. Ambassador. Croatia, you have the floor, Mr. Ambassador.
President, Croatia recognizes China's efforts in building a large education, social security, and healthcare system. However, we encourages China to establish strategies for lifelong education of older persons and improvement of their literacy. Furthermore, the implementation of recommendations by UN treaty bodies and special procedures could be advanced. Croatia has 3 recommendations. 1, ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 2, ratify the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. 3, adopt effective legislation measures to eliminate discriminatory acts against ethnic minorities. Croatia wishes China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for you, Mr. Ambassador Cuba.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. We bid a warm welcome to the Chinese delegation, and we acknowledge your commitment to the UPR recommendations to further strengthen institutions, rules and procedure of the people's democracy as part of the socialist rule of law, which characterizes China, to promote the multi-level health insurance, develop a long-term care system, and to further improve quality of education for areas where ethnic minorities live, and to strengthen the standard of written and spoken Chinese, and to further develop women's role in China, stepping up efforts to deal with the common issues faced by women, and also to carry out monitoring on cancer. Thank you very much. Cyprus has the floor.
Mr. President, Cyprus welcomes the Chinese delegation and thanks them for their presentation. Since the last UPR cycle, China has made positive advancements as regards the improvement of living standards, elimination of poverty, advancement of healthcare, social security, and education. Cyprus recommends continuing with progress on gender-related issues such as equal representation of women in senior and leadership positions, equal pay, and increased legal protection for gender-based violence victims, reducing maternal mortality by continuing the improvements of the maternal and child health service system, considering the establishment of a moratorium on the use of the death penalty with the aim of working towards its total abolition. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam. The floor is for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK. You have the
Mr. President, the DPRK delegation warmly welcomes the delegation to the People's Republic of China and appreciate for its national report. We highly commend the government of China adhere to political system and development paths those chosen by the Chinese people, uphold the path of human rights development suitable to its national conditions, and ensure the equal enjoyment of human rights and achieve advancement of common prosperity through the Chinese path to modernization. The DPRK is convinced that China will continue to raise the level of human rights protection and promote and free of comprehensive development of people as it promotes the greater rejuvenation of the Chinese nations. We wish China's successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Czechia. Czechia. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Czech Republic welcomes the delegation of China. We wish to recommend that China first end the criminalization of religious and peaceful civil expression by ethnic and ethno-religious groups, including Muslim Uyghurs and Buddhist Tibetans and Mongolians, under the pretext of protecting state security. Second, repeal Hong Kong's national security law, ignoring fundamental rights and freedoms, and end intimidation and attacks on human rights lawyers and journalists. Third, stop cross-border kidnappings and intimidating Chinese citizens living abroad. Fourth, and violating the freedoms and privacy of Chinese citizens via online censorship and surveillance. Fifth, refrain from the forcible repatriation of North Korean refugees to the DPRK. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, President. The DRC thanks the Chinese delegation presenting the national report. We congratulate you on all the efforts since the last cycle to promote people's democracy, rule of law, protect human rights, social justice and equity, notably through ratifying a number of international human rights instruments such as the 1930 Convention on Forced Labor, the 1957 Convention on the Abolition of Forced Labor, and Marrakesh Treaty. Recommendations: we encourage China to pursue efforts to strengthen environmental rights and those of specific groups. We wish China every success in its Universal Periodic Review. I thank you, President. Thank you.
For Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Denmark welcomes the delegation of China. We recommend China to, 1, immediately implement the recommendations from the OHCHR assessment on Xinjiang. 2, release writers, bloggers, journalists, human rights defenders, and others arbitrarily detained for exercising their right to freedom of expression and guarantee this right, including in Hong Kong. 3, immediately abolish cursed residential school systems imposed on Tibetan children and ensure that persons belonging to minorities can fully enjoy their cultural rights and use their own language. And 4, ratify OPCAT. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. La parole est à Djibouti.
I call on Djibouti. Thank you, President. Djibouti welcomes the high-level Chinese delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. My delegation welcomes significant progress made by China in promoting and protecting human rights, notably by integrating a number of recommendations from the third cycle into domestic law. We have the following recommendations. 1, to continue implementing all the tasks set out in the National Human Rights Action Plan 2021-2025 and strengthen the full inclusion of persons with disabilities in society, notably by promoting greater access of children with disabilities to education and vocational training. We wish China every success in the review. I thank you. I call on Dominica.
Dominica commends China on its advancement in all key areas of human rights. Dominica supports China in its plan to continue to raise the level of human rights protection and promote the free and comprehensive development of all its people. Dominica makes three recommendations to China: to fully develop whole process people's democracy along the development path chosen by the Chinese people and the organic law-based governance of China for people-based all-inclusive development. Two, to continue taking measures for improving women's development, including increased participation of women in public affairs. Three, to continue measures to improve respect for and protection of human rights into the Constitution of the Communist Party of China and the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, and to uphold the equality of all before the law and social security system for all Chinese. Dominica wishes the government and people of China successful UPR and continued success and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Dominican Republic.
Thank you, President. The Dominican Republic welcomes the Chinese delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. We applaud progress on eradicating gender discrimination in employment and fighting sexual harassment in the workplace. Recommendations: 1, continue improving the building of preschool centres and compulsory school levels, and further improve the protection of the rights and interests of women and promote gender equality. We wish you every success.
Ecuador tiene la palabra.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. Ecuador extends a cordial welcome to the Chinese delegation and thanks it for presenting the national report. We underscore efforts to promote gender equality in employment. Respectful recommendations: 1, actions to prevent, detect and combat trafficking in persons and provide victim protection. 2, consider human rights-based approach in cooperation and development plans and policies. And 3, to promote the necessary measures to ensure that companies and financial institutions operating in your country respect human rights in all their business activities. Ecuador wishes China every success in the UPR. Thank you very much.
The
floor is to Egypt. Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of China and thank them for their presentation. We applaud China's efforts in reinforcing national human rights mechanisms and improving human rights, particularly in rural areas, together with reinforcing policies on child and women rights, the rights of elderly, and the protection of personal data. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, we table the following recommendations. Firstly, continue proposing a resolution on the enforcement of economic, social, and cultural rights in the HRC. Secondly, implement the new amended law on women's rights. Thirdly, bolster legislations and policies and women's development. We wish the best for the government of China. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Guinea Ecuatorial tiene la palabra.
The Republic of Equatorial Guinea congratulates the People's Republic of China for the significant progress made in the area of human rights by attaching greater importance to protecting rights and interests of persons with disabilities and promoting the national economic, social, cultural development plans and sustainable development plans for persons with disabilities in line with the 2030 agenda. Recommendations to build and use the National Cultural Park and to continue taking part in the treaty body reform of the United Nations treaty bodies. We wish China every success in the review. Thank you.
Floor is for Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Eritrea welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China and thanks for its national report. We appreciate and applaud the system of ethnic regional autonomy, which undoubtedly guarantees the protection of political rights of people of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Eritrea recommends the following. 1, continue to improve the mechanism for supervising law enforcement and judiciary while improving those of law enforcement and judiciary personnel themselves. 2, continue to uphold the regional ethnic autonomy system and comprehensively promote ethnic unity and progress. 3, continue to promote and safeguard the rights of Hong Kong and Macau residents in accordance with all relevant local laws. We wish the People's Republic of China every success in its review. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Estonia.
Estonia welcomes the delegation of China. Estonia recommends China to ratify the ICCPR and its second optional protocol, respect and ensure the rights of persons belonging to ethnic and religious minorities, in particular in Xinjiang and Tibet. Enable all members of civil society to freely engage with international human rights mechanisms without fear of intimidation and reprisals. Cooperate fully with all human rights treaty bodies and implement their recommendations. Cooperate fully with OHCHR and special procedures mandate holders and ensure their unrestricted access to all regions of China. Enable unrestricted use of internet by ensuring the safe flow of information without violating the freedom of opinion and expression. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Ethiopia.
Ethiopia warmly welcomes the delegation of China to the 45th session of the UPR Working Group of the Human Rights Council. Ethiopia applauds China for improving the criminal litigation system, rigorously implements legal principles so as to make the judicial procedures of human rights in a more orderly way and with stronger credibility. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Ethiopia recommends to the delegation of China to continue to strengthen the development of a culture of rule of law in society and carry out publicity and education on the rule of law. Finally, Ethiopia wishes a successful engagement to the delegation of China. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Fiji.
Mr. President, Fiji welcomes the delegation of China and commends the government for its commitment to poverty alleviation. Fiji applauds China's efforts through its targeted poverty alleviation strategy, which has seen nearly 100 million rural poor lifted out of poverty, thereby achieving the SDG poverty reduction target 10 years ahead of schedule. With respect, Fiji recommends as follows. 1, continue to strengthen efforts in combating trafficking in persons, especially the trafficking of women and children, and provide effective protection and assistance to the victims of trafficking. And 2, continue to strengthen efforts in effectively implementing the Healthy China strategy, including improving access to affordable healthcare services, especially in primary care service at the local and in rural areas. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Finland, Mrs. Ambassador.
Mr. President, Finland welcomes the opportunity to engage in a UPR dialogue with China and respectfully recommends the following. 1, to guarantee the protection of human rights lawyers against any form of harassment, violence, or attempts to impede or interfere with the defense of their clients in accordance with international law. 2, to protect and promote human rights of ethnic and religious minorities, including the Xinjiang Uyghurs, in line with OHCHR's recommendations and UN treaty bodies' concluding observations and decisions. 3, to invite the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief to visit China, including Xinjiang. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Merci. Je donne la parole.
Thank you. I call on France. No microphone. Thank you, President. France welcomes the Chinese delegation. We note the voluntary commitments made since re-election to the HRC. We have the following recommendations: a moratorium on the death penalty, ratify the International Convention on Enforced Disappearance, ensure protection of the freedom of religion, particularly for Uyghurs and Tibetans, and the report on the implementation ILO Conventions 29 and others, and strengthen forced residence in monitored places and ensure freedom of expression online and in Hong Kong. Thank you very much, President. Thank you. I give the floor to Gabon. President, my delegation welcomes the Chinese delegation and thanks it for presenting its national report. We commend actions to promote child protection through improvements to the law on the protection of minors and the law on preventing juvenile delinquency. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1, to continue to promote the rights of women, children, and to promote gender equality. 2, to further improve the curricula and general education in human rights. And 2, disseminate human rights throughout society. We wish China every success. I thank you, Ambassador.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Gambia welcomes the delegation of China and thank them for their interaction with the Human Rights Council today. We wish to commend the government of China for its commitment to narrowing the development gap between urban and rural areas and between regions and for providing equal employment opportunities for rural and urban workers. Mr. President, while recognizing the efforts and commitments being made by the government of China, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. One, reinforces the safeguarding of ethnic and religious minorities' rights by promoting the preservation of cultural identities. Two, continue to advance administrative and judicial reforms for the ratification of the Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Three, increase information accessibility to help the elderly and people with disabilities.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Germany.
Mr. President, Germany welcomes the Chinese delegation commending the amendments to the law on the protection of women's rights and interests. Germany remains highly concerned about serious human rights violations, especially in Xinjiang and Tibet. Germany recommends to revoke all laws restricting freedoms of expression and assembly, cease all reprisals against human rights defenders and civil society organizations, implement all recommendations of the OHCHR report on Xinjiang and of UN treaty bodies, respect the rights of persons belonging to ethnic and religious minorities, including Xinjiang and Tibet, restore full respect for the rule of law and civil society and political rights in Hong Kong, abolish all coercive practices and labor transfer programs in boarding schools, adopt anti-discrimination legislation relating to diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, and to release all human rights defenders from arbitrary detention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Ghana.
Mr. President, Ghana welcomes the delegation of China and commends the government for its efforts towards the promotion of socioeconomic development, poverty reduction, increased access to education and healthcare, as well as adherence to the rule of law and social justice. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Ghana recommends that China maintains its constructive engagement and collaboration with international human rights mechanisms with a view to building on the progress achieved in previous UPR cycles and continue the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and strengthen the creation of literary and artistic works for persons with disabilities. We wish China a very successful review process. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, I understand that your delegation would like to make some comments on the recommendation and observation received so far, so please, you have the floor.
Mr. President, at the outset, I'd like to thank the delegations who have spoken for their positive comments about China's human rights cause and very important questions and recommendations. Before this session, China has received some advanced written questions. In order to save time, in the next interactive dialogue, we will respond these questions in 3 rounds. And we will have some response to some similar questions together to save time. In the first round, I'm going to ask my colleagues from the NPC, the Ministry of Justice, the Development and Reform Committee of China, the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education, the State Council's Working Committee on Women and Children, Working Committee on Persons with Disabilities, the National Health Commission, the Information Office of the State Council to respond to the questions one after another. And then the Ambassador Chen Xu of the Chinese delegation will brief you on the China's participation in international human rights cooperation. Now I give the floor to my colleagues. Mr. President, I am from the National People's Congress. I'm going to answer the question concerning China's whole process people's democracy. Democracy is the common value of all humanity. The whole process people's democracy is guaranteed by a complete set of institutions. Under our constitution, all power belongs to the people. Our people elect their own representatives to the NPC and local people's congresses, which exercise state power on their behalf. The administrative, supervisory, and procuratory entities are then elected by the People's Congresses, which are accountable to the people and subject to their supervision. There are together 2.77 million elected deputies, including 2.62 million at the county and township level. They are elected directly by over 1 billion voters nationwide on one-person, one-vote basis. Through multi-party cooperation and ethnic autonomy, our people are guaranteed the right to administer the state affairs.
the whole process, People's Democracy, has a broad participation in China. The party and the state consult widely on all major decisions. For example, the 14th five-year plan, which gathered more than 1 million opinion online in 2020. In our work, every draft law needs to be made public to see public opinion. Our office has more than 40 grassroots focal points covering population of 80 million. 6,540 focal points are run by provinces and cities to convey people's opinion to the legislative body. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from the Ministry of Justice. I'm going to answer questions concerning the rule of law in all its aspects, awareness raising, and lawyers' rights. China is committed to the rule of law in all its aspects and strives to build a country, the government, and the society according to the rule of law, with particular attention to legislation, law enforcement, administration of justice, and law-abiding society. Under the leadership of the CPC, Central Committee, and overall situation of governance through rule of law is taking shape. We have carried out nationwide new law awareness raising campaign and established the National Constitution Day, the system of constitutional oath taking. These have helped to promote the running of the society through rule of law. The criminal procedure law, the law on lawyers, and various policy documents explicitly provide for the protection of lawyers' rights. The Lawyers Association also set up centers specializing in providing relief and protection of lawyers. In the past 10 years, the number of lawyers has grown from 300,000 to more than 700,000. This is a telling figure about lawyers' rights to practice law. Of course, lawyers must abide by the law in their professional activities. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from the National Development and Reform Commission. I'm going to answer questions about high-quality development and the Belt and Road Initiative as it concerns the human rights. The Chinese government adheres to a people-centered approach in ensuring universal access to basic public service and enjoyment of rights of survival and development for all. Equal access to basic public service is listed as a goal of Chinese-style modernization. Every 5 years, a public service plan is to be formulated, the national criterion updated regularly, which covers 81 service items ranging from childcare, education, labor protection, healthcare, retirement, housing, and vulnerable groups protection. This is to make social policy the ultimate safeguard of people's livelihood. With our success in overcoming absolute poverty and with the largest social security system in the world, we in China are making solid progress towards common prosperity for all our citizens. In addition, China is pushing for high-quality implementation of Belt and Road Initiative through pragmatic cooperation. We are coordinating the landmark projects with small but beautiful livelihood projects in an effort to enhance people's sense of gain and happiness to realize common development and prosperity of various countries in the world. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm going to answer questions concerning poverty elimination and rural revitalization. In light of our reality, we have reformed and innovated new institution mechanisms for targeted and precise poverty alleviation. By mobilizing the efforts of the whole country in 8 years, we have eliminated absolute poverty. By the end of 2020, about 100 million people were lifted out of poverty, enjoying adequate food, clothing, free education, basic healthcare, and housing. This means that the poverty alleviation target under the 2030 agenda has been achieved 10 years ahead of schedule. Starting from 2021, China set a 5-year transition to keep the overall assistance policy in place. Each year since, the central and local government put in 300 billion yuan to consolidate and expand the results of the poverty alleviation work, and to ensure no massive return to poverty occurred. There are several measures we've taken. One, we set up monitor and support mechanism to identify quickly the risk of poverty return and apply targeted support measures. Second, to improve people's ability to endogenous development through industrialization and job creation. Each year, the number of jobs created for people out of poverty has been maintained at 30 million. The average of income growth is higher than the national average. 3, to normalize assistance and support mechanism for low-income population and less developed regions to reduce the income gap between urban and rural areas. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from Ministry of Education. I'm going to answer questions about right to education and bilingual education. The government upholds priority on education and takes a people-centered approach to develop education. In terms of universal access to education, China has reached and oversurpassed the average level of mid and high income countries. Gross enrollment rate for preschool kindergarten, 89.7%, 9-year compulsory education, nearly 100%, senior high school and higher education, 91.6% and 59.6%. The average number of years in schooling for new workforce has reached 14 years. The compulsory education enrollment rate for children with disability exceeds 95%. The program of financial assistance to students has achieved comprehensive coverage. We have implemented a national strategy on digitalization of education. The Smart Education Network platform is connected with every school in country. A lifelong learning system is open to everyone. Our government attaches great importance to bilingual education and implementing relevant laws to support schools in ethnic minority regions to offer bilingual education using common Chinese language and the local ethnic language. Special funds are allocated to support the compilation of textbooks and training teachers for minority languages. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from the Office of Working Committee on Women and Children under the State Council. I'm going to answer questions concerning the rights and interests of women and children. China is seriously implementing the state policy of equality between men and women, the principle of priority on children. More than 100 laws and regulations guarantee the rights of women and children. In the 5-year plan for national economic and social development, women and children have a special chapter. A new cycle of women development outline and children development outline are being implemented. Gender assessment mechanisms have been put in laws and regulations, as well as monitoring program on gender statistics. More than 100 cities have engaged in building child-friendly cities. China's women and children's schools are making new headways. 44.16 million rural women are lifted out of absolute poverty. Primary school net enrollment rates for girls reached 99.9%, with basically no gender gap. Women's average life expectancy is above 80 years old. Women enjoy equal rights in pension, medical care, unemployment benefit, professional injuries, and other social security protections. 660 million women are covered by basic medical insurance. And in the new business model, women account for 1/3 of the workforce. Through 380,000 Women's Council, we women are participating in the governance of the country, especially in the grassroots. Mr. President, I'm from the Working Committee on Women and Children at the State Council. I'm going to answer questions regarding persons with disabilities. China pays great attention to the work of the people with disabilities and adopt laws and regulations to help them. More than 100 laws and regulations regulate the protection of the rights of disabilities. There are also social security and service care system in place. More than 7 million persons with disabilities in the rural areas are guaranteed of their basic living standards. 9 million persons with disabilities in the urban areas are employed or have their own business, and 6,000 persons with disabilities or their family members are elected members of the National People's Congresses or local People's Congresses. The Chinese sport delegation to the Paralympics have made great achievements in the next socio-economic development process. The disability people will be better protected so that no disability person is left behind so that they can enjoy a wonderful life. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from National Health Commission. I'm going to answer questions concerning Healthy China strategy. As the government regards the protection of people's health as a strategic priority, a policy decision has thus been made to implement the Healthy China strategy. As a result, the basic Medicare and health protection law was quickly adopted, together with the Healthy China 2030 vision. This program envisioned 15 actions in 3 aspects, which are intervention in factors affecting health, keeping lifelong good health, prevention and control of major disease. By effectively implementing the Healthy China action points, we strive to accelerate the paradigm shift from treating disease to keeping people healthy. We pay great attention to health of women and children and has continued to standardize the management of maternal health, including prenatal checkups and postnatal visits. In recent years, a maternal and child safety system is being implemented. The system provides for pregnancy risk screening and assessment and set up specific file for high-risk women. By the end of 2020, China's maternal mortality rate dropped to 15.7 per 100,000 live births. Infant mortality rate dropped to 4.9%. China is a high-performing country in maternal and child health in the WHO list. In 2021, average life expectancy reached 78.2, with major health indicators better. Mr. President, I'm from the Information Office of the State Council. I'm going to answer questions related to a National Action Plan. China formulated 4 National Human Rights Action Plans, which we have followed in takeaways in the implementation of this action plan. 1, we need to advance human rights in a coordinated fashion. We formulated indicators in all fronts: civil, political, economic, social, cultural rights. 2, we advance our work equally. And 3, we must adopt pragmatism. Both the point of departure and the ultimate goal of our work on human rights is to meet our people's actual needs. 4th, we use smart technology. We use digital technology to achieve comprehensive development of all persons. Human rights education is an indispensable, important element in the development of China's human rights endeavor. Human rights education is systematically organized in school. It takes different forms. And we also set up human rights discipline and subjects in Institute of Higher Learning. We also use media, exposition, seminar, and academic lectures to disseminate knowledge of human rights. And we also make effort to enhance human rights training on public servants and on overseas Chinese companies. Thank you. Mr. President, with regard to international human rights cooperation, we fulfill our international cooperation obligations. And on many occasions, we submit resolutions on contribution on human rights, contribution of development on human rights, the mutually beneficial cooperation in the field of human rights, and the promotion of economic, social, and cultural rights against the backdrop of elimination of inequality. We are committed to safeguarding international justice and equity to improve the representation and the voice of developing countries. With OHCHR, the special mechanism, the treaty bodies, we have engaged in constructive exchange and cooperation. We have invited the former High Commissioner, Madame Batchelor, an independent expert on the rights of the elderly, to visit China. We have responded timely and seriously to all the communications from special mechanisms. On the basis of equality and mutual respect, we have held dialogue with all sides. We hold Beijing Human Rights Forum, South-South Human Rights Forum, and the High-Level Forum on Global Human Rights Governance, and the 75th anniversary celebration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We will actively participate in the United Nations Human Rights Affairs and to promote dialogue and cooperation and work together with all countries to promote the healthy development of international human rights cause. Thank you. Mr. President, this is the end of our first round of response. For those questions we have not responded, we will try our best to respond to them in the next 2 rounds. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of China for its comments. And now we pursue our interactive dialogue. And for such purpose, I begin by giving the floor to the delegation of Greece. Greece, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Greece welcomes the delegation of China and takes note of the steps taken since the last UPR review towards eliminating absolute poverty, advancing its healthcare and education systems, and ratifying key ILO conventions. Greece recommends the following. Take measures to prevent the harassment, intimidation, and targeting of civil society members, journalists, human rights defenders, and lawyers. 2. Further ensure the full and unrestricted enjoyment by minorities of their cultural rights and the right to education, as well as protect their cultural diversity, practices, and heritage, in implementation of relevant CESCR and CEDAW concluding observations. 3. Accelerate the ratification of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We wish the delegation of China a successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Hungary.
Thank you. Hungary thanks China for its detailed report. We believe that the UPR serves as a platform for constructive dialogue to promote human rights worldwide and shouldn't be used for the instrumentalization of human rights issues. Hungary is pleased that China has ratified or acceded to several human rights instruments since its last UPR. We appreciate the government's contribution to upholding the UN-centered international system and its expeditious implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We wish to make the following recommendation. Further accelerate integrated urban and rural development. Hungary wishes to recommend continue to reinforce the protection of lawyers' rights to practice and continue to improve the world's largest education, social security, and healthcare systems. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Iceland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Iceland welcomes the delegation of China in its national report. In the spirit of constructive engagement, Iceland recommends the following. 1. Ratify the ICCPR. 2. Abolish the death penalty and ratify the ICCPR's second optional protocol. 3. Enforce the 2016 anti-domestic violence law and investigate and prosecute domestic violence cases. 4. End violations of reproductive rights and coercive enforcement of family planning policies, including those in Xinjiang. 5. Remove restrictions on freedom of expression and press freedom, including on Sogiersk-related media content, and allow registration of Sogiersk CSOs. I wish China all success for its review. I thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for India.
Mr. President, India warmly welcomes the delegation of China. India takes note of the progress made by China on the recommendations received during the previous cycle. India recommends the following. 1. Continue taking steps to ensure fullest enjoyment of basic human rights by its people through inclusive and sustainable development. Number 2. Continue taking measures to promote gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. Number 3. Continue to play a constructive role in the realization of aspirations of developing countries, including through reform of multilateral institutions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indonesia thanks the delegation of China for its report. We appreciate continued commitment of China in developing national human rights action plan and promoting the right to development. In constructive spirit, we recommend China to 1. Continue advance the right to health by improving regulatory framework to prevent, prepare, and respond to pandemic. 2. Strengthen the protection of freedom of religion or belief for all people and ensure its effective implementation on the ground. 3. Continue the efforts to ensure the right of all migrant workers and members of their family are fully safeguarded. Finally, we wish China a successful UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Iran.
Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran welcomes the delegation of China to this review session and commend their full engagement with UPR mechanism. We appreciate the economic programs implemented by the government of China with the aim of promoting social, cultural, and economic rights in China. We also welcome the adoption of the National Action Plan for Human Rights. We recommend China to 1. Implement the Healthy China Initiative and the Patriotic Health Movement and advocate healthy lifestyles. 2. To continue to protect the cultural rights of ethnic minorities and increase support for the development of ethnic minority areas. The Islamic Republic of Iran wishes for China all the success in implementation of the UPR process. I thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I give the floor to Iraq. Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the delegation of the People's Republic of China, and we commend the steps that they have taken since the last UPR, especially in the legislative field. And we also commend their national strategies and plan to advance human rights in the country. They have also exerted efforts in health and services for the elderly, and we also commend their efforts in poverty eradication. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we have the following recommendations. First, to improve the situation of women in rural areas. Two, to exert more efforts in the framework of the national plans to improve the marine ecology, and to exert more efforts to protect a cultural heritage. And we wish China all success in this UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Ireland, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Chairman. Ireland thanks China for its presentation today. Ireland is deeply concerned about the continued repression of civil society in China, including harassment of human rights defenders, restrictions on freedom of expression, including in Hong Kong, and the treatment of ethnic and religious groups, including in Xinjiang and Tibet. Ireland is also concerned by widespread discrimination against members of the LGBTQI+ community. Ireland recommends that China, 1, ratify the ICCPR, 2, immediately release all arbitrarily detained human rights defenders, journalists and civil society activists, and 3, enact laws explicitly prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We wish China every success in this UPR cycle. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Israel welcomes the delegation of China to the UPR, thanks it for its national report, and notes its efforts in implementing recommendations since the last review. At the same time, Israel remains concerned with the situation in Xinjiang and the human rights of the Uyghur minority. Israel would like to recommend China to 1, take practical steps to improve the human rights situation in Xinjiang. 2, take further action to ensure that older persons, in particular older women and older persons with disability, enjoy an adequate standard of living and have access to basic services, especially in rural areas. 3, ratify ICCPR and to allow a flourishing civil society, including independent NGOs that address societal discrimination and effectively combats violence against women and children. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Italy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Setting its commitment to the UPR, Italy recommends China to introduce a moratorium on the death penalty, adopt rigorous procedure for reviewing capital sentences and reporting death penalty cases, provide information on the identity and number of individuals waiting for execution, as well on death sentences and executions, take effective measures to prevent any form of discrimination against ethnic and religious groups and minorities, guarantee freedom of opinion and expressing, enhancing effort to create an environment in which journalists, human rights defenders and NGOs can freely operate in accordance with international standards, removing obstacles to their access to information, mobility, and interaction with civil society. Italy wishes China a successful UPR.
Thank you. The floor is for Jamaica.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jamaica warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China to today's UPR exercise and thanks them for their comprehensive presentation. We commend the delegation on the progress in the implementation of the recommendations accepted during the 3rd UPR cycle. My delegation notes positively that China has recorded robust social and economic development. We note further that through the implementation of its poverty alleviation strategy, the welfare of approximately 100 million rural poor has been improved. Additionally, we welcome efforts to improve the situation of vulnerable groups, including the elderly, women, children, and the disabled, as well as initiatives aimed at improving the health of citizens throughout their life cycles. We support the government's efforts to implement other reforms, including those to safeguard the rights of lawyers to practice law and improve their participation in the litigation system. We wish the delegation of China every success for this UPR process. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Japan.
Mr. President, Japan is concerned about the human rights situation in China and makes the following recommendations. Protect the rights of the minorities, including Tibetans and Uyghurs, including their rights to enjoy their cultural and religious practice as recommended by CESCR. Guarantee the fundamental rights and freedom of the thought set forth under the Hong Kong Basic Law and improve the one country, two systems. Guarantee transparent legal procedures, including fair trials, access to legal representatives of defendants choosing and prompt notification to families, and ratify ICCPR and ICPPED. Japan takes note of China initiatives on economic development, but expects China to take
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Jordan.
يرحب وفد بلادي برئيس وأعضاء جمهورية.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of China. We welcome the measures taken to fight crimes such as the kidnapping of women and trafficking in women. We hail the review of laws on marriage and that marriage registration. We recommend first that they continue efforts to provide additional category of vulnerable individuals to re-strengthen justice and to continue to improve social coverage and healthcare, education, and retirement. Thank you.
Kazakhstan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Kazakhstan warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We commend the country's achievements in poverty reduction, in promoting gender equality, and the balanced development of education between urban and rural areas. My delegation would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Continue to engage constructively with OHCHR special procedures and treaty bodies. 2. Optimize the allocation of regional higher education resources and promote the revitalization of higher education in central and western regions. 3. Maintain the implementation of the judicial reform plans and continue to promote the modernization of the system and capacity. 4. Strengthen the whole process of monitoring the quality and safety of agricultural products. We wish the delegation of China a very successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Kenya.
I thank you, Mr. President. Kenya warmly welcomes the high-level distinguished delegation of the People's Republic of China to this cycle of UPR process and thanks them for their national report and its oral update. Kenya attaches great importance to China and commend it for acceding to the Convention abolishing forced labor and the Marrakesh Treaty and welcome the economic development cooperation programs undertaken, including in Kenya. We make the following recommendations for consideration. 1. Continue to implement the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 in the policy of prioritizing conservation, protection, and natural restoration. 2. Continue to strengthen and improve the regulatory systems for food and drug safety measures. Finally, we wish the delegation of China a very successful EPR process. I thank you.
Thank you. وأعطي الكلمة الآن للكويت.
Give the floor to Kuwait.
Please.
Thank you, President. We have taken note of, and very carefully so, of the report of which we are seized. We would like to avail ourselves of this opportunity to hail the efforts deployed in the drafting of this document and this report. We have the following recommendations. 1, continue to bolster religious tolerance in Xinjiang. 2, to continue the development of legislation and labor mechanisms for the protection of workers. 3, strengthen the promotion of education, including in science and the preservation of biodiversity. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador. Kyrgyzstan, please, Mr. Ambassador.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. Kyrgyzstan warmly welcomes the delegation of China and recommend 1, implement the Health China initiative. 2, adhere to people-centered development of education, accelerate the construction of a high-quality education system, develop quality education, and promote educational equity. 3, continue to protect the right of minority ethnic groups to participate as equals in administering state and social affairs. Protect the cultural rights of ethnic minorities and increase support for the development of ethnic minority areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Lao People's Democratic Republic.
The Lao PDR thank Chinese delegation for the report. My delegation commends China for the remarkable progress made in advancing human rights mechanism, including China's positive contribution to UNHRC and its adhering to a people-oriented philosophy of human rights. The Laupedia recommends the following. 1, continue to improve judicial system and enforce judicial accountability. And 2, continue to improve the capacity for disaster prevention, mitigation, relief, and response to major public emergencies. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Latvia welcomes the delegation of China to the UPR working group. Latvia would like to make the following recommendations. 1, to respond positively to pending visit requests by the special procedures mandate holders of the Human Rights Council. 2, to consider ratification of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. 3, to cease the regulatory and judicial persecution of human rights defenders and journalists for exercising their rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Latvia wishes the delegation of China success in the review. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Lebanon.
السيد الرئيس يرحب.
Thank you, President. Lebanon wishes a warm welcome to the Chinese delegation, and we commend the progress that China has achieved in fighting poverty, in promoting human rights, especially as regards socioeconomic rights. In a constructive spirit, we recommend 1, to continue efforts aimed at ensuring a balanced, sustainable development and reducing gaps between rural and urban areas. Secondly, to continue the fight against informal labor and to give due attention in order to tackle the negative impacts of this phenomenon. We wish China every success. Thank you.
Shukran, Sayyid Safir. I now give the floor to Lesotho.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lesotho welcomes the distinguished delegation of China to the 4th UPR cycle. We welcome efforts made by the government to improve the function of the judiciary by integrating modern science and technology in the work of the judiciary. Whilst noting the positive developments made, Lesotho wishes to recommend China to 1, bolster efforts to combat new types of cyber and transnational crimes. 2, to continue efforts to ensure universal health coverage in the country, especially in disadvantaged communities. And lastly, to consider ratifying the Convention on Enforced Disappearance and the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers. We wish China every success with this UPR cycle. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Liberia extends a warm welcome to the People's Republic of China and expresses gratitude for the presentation of a comprehensive national report. We wish to commend the steps taken by China since the last cycle, particularly towards economic and social development, which has had a substantial progress in education, social welfare, healthcare, and poverty reduction. My delegation would like to make the following 2 recommendations: further enhance the provision of compulsory education and public services in rural areas, strengthen the legislative framework safeguarding women's rights and interests. Liberia wishes China a successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Libya. Libya لكم كلمة.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. We wish the Chinese delegation a warm welcome, and we commend them for the report, which shows the progress achieved and cooperation with the Human Rights Council. We commend the measures taken to ensure that citizens enjoy their social and economic rights. We recommend, firstly, to continue strengthening the role of justice, especially for the promotion of human rights. Secondly, to continue efforts to combat poverty. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Liechtenstein by video message.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a constructive spirit, Liechtenstein recommends that China first ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and its optional protocols. Second, implement the recommendations of the OHCHR's assessment of the human rights concerns in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Third, ensure that human rights defenders, journalists, and lawyers, including in Hong Kong, are not targeted for exercising their freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly in line with international human rights law. And fourth, establish a moratorium on the death penalty with a view to its complete abolition. We thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lithuania welcomes the delegation of China and would like to make the following recommendations. 1, ensure that children in all regions, including Tibetan children, are guaranteed the right to use their language in every aspect of their schooling. 2, guarantee the right of all citizens to opinion and expression without fear of reprisals and censorship in all regions, including Hong Kong, Tibet, and others. 3, ensure that all detainees are formally accounted for, granted access to their families, and held in officially recognized places of detention. 4, prevent attempts to interpret national security laws as justification to target human rights defenders, journalists, and other media workers outside the country. We wish China all success in the current UPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Luxembourg.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, President. Luxembourg extends a cordial welcome to the Chinese delegation, and we acknowledge the efforts that have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. We have the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the ICCPR. 2, to abolish the death penalty. 3, to address a standing invitation to this Council's special procedures. 4thly, to implement the recommendations of the report of the Office of the High Commissioner on the Human Rights Situation in Xinjiang. 5, to review the legal framework on national security for Hong Kong and China and bring it into line with international human rights law. And 6, to repeal the practice of residential surveillance at a designated location. Thank you. I thank the Ambassador and give the floor to Madagascar. Thank you, President. Madagascar would like to thank China for its national report. We commend China on the progress made since the previous review. In particular, we commend its accession to the 1930 and 1957 conventions on the abolition of forced labor. We also commend the development and implementation of 4 national human rights plans. In a constructive spirit, Madagascar recommends 1, to fully implement the right to housing, ensuring that buildings provide accommodation for individuals and families with low income and not for speculation. And secondly, to step up efforts to ensure a sufficient and balanced development for the various facets of the population in urban and rural areas. Thank you. We wish China every success. Thank you.
Malawi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malawi welcomes China to this review, and we note the progressive steps taken by China in the promotion and protection of human rights. We make the following recommendations. 1, continue taking all measures to implement the Human Rights Action Plan 2021 to 2025. 2, continue taking all measures to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. We wish China all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We give the floor to Maldives.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives warmly welcomes the high-level delegation from the People's Republic of China to this 4th cycle review and thanks the delegation for their presentation today. The Maldives commends China for optimizing supply of marriage and family counseling services, ensuring early detection of possible and potential domestic violence, trafficking of women, and illegal and criminal acts in the field of marriage registration, and making every effort to protect women's legitimate rights and interests. In constructive spirit, the Maldives makes the following recommendations. Continuously promote the implementation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement, and actively carry out South-South cooperation on climate change. We wish China a successful review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. I give the floor to Malaysia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Malaysia commends China for the remarkable progress in economic and social development, especially in poverty eradication. In this spirit of constructive engagement, Malaysia recommends China the following. 1, to enhance initiatives to broaden older people's access to public service, and 2, to continue promoting religious and social harmony, including by strengthening constructive engagement with human rights mechanism. Malaysia wishes China every success in its review. Thank you.
Thank you, madame. Je donne la parole au...
I give the floor to Mali. Thank you, President. Mali extends a cordial welcome to the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We commend their participation in the 4th UPR cycle. My delegation commends China's efforts, which led to its achieving the first goal of the century within the set timeline. This was building a moderately prosperous society in all areas and reducing poverty as foreseen by the 2030 Sustainable Development Programme. My delegation would also like to highlight significant improvements in access to education for children and teenagers with disabilities through the creation of a first specialized university in rehabilitation, vocational training for people with disabilities and their access to employment. Mali recommends to continue to boost trade and promote cooperation with developing countries and reduce poverty, to continue to strengthen human rights for people in vulnerable situations. Thank you.
To Malta.
Thank you, President. Malta warmly welcomes the delegation of China and would like to recommend the following. 1. Enact legislation to abolish the death penalty and establish a moratorium as an interim measure. 2. Enforce legislation to combat snatching and hiding of children as a method to hold custody of children during family court proceedings. 3. Consider enacting national legislation that specifically protects all human rights of LGBTIQ persons. 4. Recognize all ethnic groups in the country on an equal basis as recommended by the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. We wish the delegation of China a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Marshall Island by video. We're not hearing the video. Could we have the video, please? If not, we will probably come back to it later. So we then move to, I give the floor to Mauritania. Vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We took note with interest of the report on the review, and we would like to seize this opportunity to express our appreciation to the efforts of the Friendly People's Republic of China in order to protect and promote human rights whilst respecting rule of law, justice, and social equity, and preserving the social stability on the long term. Mr. President, we commend the durable success of the Chinese government's ambitious socio-economic plans, as well as sharing its experience in socio-economic development with other countries who want to benefit from them. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. First, to pursue efforts to reduce poverty. Second, to pursue efforts to improve women's levels of education and employment. Finally, we would like to wish them success in the current UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now the floor is for Mauritius by video.
Thank you, Chair. The Mauritius delegation would like to extend a very warm welcome to the high-level delegation of the People's Republic of China. Mauritius extends its appreciation to the Chinese government for its voluntary contribution to the trust fund supporting the work of the least developed countries and the small island developing states in the Human Rights Council. In a spirit of cooperation, we would like to recommend that China continue to improve the legal system for preventing and stopping sexual harassment in the workplace and provide effective legal remedies for victims. We wish the People's Republic of China a very successful review and continued progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. And now Mexico by video also.
We welcome the delegation of China. We welcome the visit of the independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights for older persons. We recognize the constant successes made in the fight against poverty. Mexico recommends, 1, to consider accepting requests for visits by special procedures and to provide them access and information in accordance with the terms of reference. 2, to ratify the optional protocol to CEDAW, to protect sexual and reproductive rights for all women, and to take measures to encourage their political participation, including through a quota system. 3, to implement recommendations on businesses and human rights issued by the CESCR. Thank you. We wish you every success.
Dora. And now we try to come back to the video of Marshall Island. Please.
Marshall Islands welcomes the delegation of China and thank them for the report. We recommend the following for consideration. 1, implement the recommendations of the CESCR to align with the Paris Agreement by increasing taxation on emissions, suspending ongoing financing for coal-fired power plants, and replacing fossil fuel by increasing renewable energy. 2, implement the recommendations of CEDAW and CESCR by putting an end to sexual and gender-based violence against women of ethnic minorities and allowing full enjoyment of their cultural rights and right to education. 3, implement the concluding observations of CEDAW and CRPD recommending to immediately stop reprisals against human rights defenders, journalists, and individuals belonging to minority groups. And 4, adopt a human rights approach in its development and cooperation policies. Como dada, and I thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for Mongolia.
Thank you. Mongolia welcomes China's accession to the Convention on Forced Labor and Convention on the Abolition of Forced Labor. We further note with appreciation the launch of the medium and long-term action plans for the protection of women, children, and people with disability, and encourage the effective implementation. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Mongolia would like to recommend China to continue its efforts to combat trafficking in persons, to take necessary measures to protect and promote cultural diversity, to continue its efforts to address all forms of violence against women and girls, to promote gender equality and increase women's representation in political and public life. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Montenegro.
The distinguished delegation of China and the progress achieved between two UPRs. Regardless, as evidenced by UN bodies, serious human rights violations have been committed in the context of the government strategies to fight terrorism and extremism, in particular in Xinjiang and Tibet. In the constructive spirit, we recommend, 1, to review the legal framework on national security, counter-terrorism and minority rights in Xinjiang, and repeal discriminatory laws and policies against Uyghur and other ethno-religious minorities. 2, to effectively investigate allegations on human rights violation in camps and other detention facilities, including torture, sexual violence, forced labor, and other mistreatment. And 3, to ensure that mass surveillance, both online and offline, does not infringe on fundamental rights and freedoms of individuals. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. I now give the floor to Morocco.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation welcomes China delegation and the presentation of national report. We appreciate China's ratification of the Marrakesh Treaty, and in the spirit of constructive engagement, we would like to make the following recommendation. 1, continue the establishment of the national human rights education and training bases. 2, continue to attach importance to environmental protection and develop new energy and green economy. 3, combat illegal and criminal acts that infringe the right of children. Morocco wishes China a successful UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. I now give the floor to Mozambique.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mozambique welcomes the high-level delegation of China and thanks them for their comprehensive presentation. We commend the government of China for the achievement and progress made in the field of the human rights. In a constructive spirit, with my delegation offered to China the following recommendation. 1, continue to implement all tasks outlined in the Human Rights Action Plan of China 2021-2025 and make efforts toward achieving the set objectives. And 2, work to improve the quality of life of the population of China who have been lifted out of poverty. Mozambique wishes China a successful UPR process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Nepal.
President, Nepal welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China and appreciates them for the comprehensive report. We welcome China's commitment to promoting and protecting human rights through constructive dialogue and multilateral cooperation. Nepal commends China for the socio-economic progress achieved, particularly in the reduction of poverty with positive impact on the broader realization of human rights. In the constructive spirit, Nepal recommends the following. 1, continue efforts to raise living standard of the people in the rural areas. 2, continue promoting the green energy and transformation of industry sector. We wish the People's Republic of China a successful review. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor now is for Netherlands. Mr. Ambassador.
Mr. President, in the spirit of constructive engagement, the Netherlands is concerned about the severe decline of human rights in China, including in Hong Kong, and recommends China to 1, immediately implement all recommendations on Xinjiang of the OHCHR assessment report and the third CESCUR and CEDAW reviews. 2, end online censorship and end intimidation and surveillance of media workers and journalists, including in Hong Kong. 3, adopt legislation banning discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And 4, abolish the de facto coercive residential boarding and preschool system in Tibet and guarantee access to Tibetan language education. We thank China for the ratification of 2 ILO forced labor conventions and encourage full implementation and wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for New Zealand. You have the floor.
Mr. President,
please go ahead.
New Zealand welcomes China's presentation to this UPR session and recommends that China, 1, ratify the ICCPR and its second optional protocol, 2, implement the Human Rights Committee's 2022 recommendations to repeal the 2020 Hong Kong national security law and ensure processes to enact a new law are transparent and fulfill Hong Kong's commitments under the ICCPR, 3, implement the 2023 recommendations by CESCR and CEDAW on the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion by ethnic and religious minorities, including ethnic Uyghurs and Tibetans. 4, implement all recommendations from the 2022 OHCHR assessment of human rights concerns in Xinjiang. And 5, strengthen national legislation and public policy to explicitly prohibit all forms of discrimination, including on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. We thank the delegation for their participation today.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. The floor is for Nicaragua.
The government of Nicaragua would like to congratulate China on its presentation of the 4th UPR report. We also congratulate China on its achievements and victories in promoting and protecting human rights for all people without any discrimination. Nicaragua, bearing in mind the right to sovereignty and self-determination, recommends the following. 1, to further continue urban and rural development and coordinated regional development and to promote a swift improvement of living standards in rural areas and the central and western regions. 2, to continue implementing the plan for the development of women in China 2021-2030 and the plan for children. We reiterate our recognition for China's efforts to improve protection and promotion of human rights. Thank you.
The floor, je donne la parole au Niger.
I give the floor to Niger. Thank you, President. Niger extends a cordial welcome to the delegation of China. We congratulate China on the presentation of the national report. Niger commends China for having respected the use of various ethnic languages and also for the other significant progress achieved since the last UPR cycle. In a constructive spirit, Niger recommends 1, to continue improving the quality of life of people who have been lifted out of poverty. Secondly, to continue boosting assistance for employment for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Niger wishes China every success. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nigeria warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We applaud the Chinese government for its initiatives that have resulted in a remarkable reduction of poverty and enhanced the economic and social rights of millions of its citizens. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend China to 1, improve human rights education for its citizens by implementing comprehensive awareness-raising programs, and 2, to enhance its legal system and strengthen judicial safeguards for the promotion and protection of human rights of all. Finally, we wish China a very successful review process. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. I give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. Norway welcomes the cooperative engagement with China in the UPR process, but remains concerned about the human rights situation. Norway recommends that China, 1, abolish the death penalty for all crimes. 2, allow unhindered access to UN special rapporteurs and independent experts to evaluate persistent reports of violations of human rights in China, including in Xinjiang and Tibet. 3, allow freedom of expression in all its forms as mandated by international human rights law and standards. 4, ensure free, safe and meaningful social and political participation of marginalized groups and human rights defenders, including LGBT+ persons and religious groups. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. أعطي الكلمة الآن لعمان.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the head of the delegation of the Friendly People's Republic of China, and we thank them for the national report. We took note of the report, and we highly appreciate the measures taken by China in order to implement the recommendations of the previous UPR, namely the National Human Rights Plan for 2021-2025 and the program on development of children. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. First, to pursue promotion of the system of care to older persons in coordination with TSOs and households. And second, to pursue efforts to implement the law on protection of children as part of protecting the child's best interest. We wish them success in this review.
Pakistan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan warmly welcomes the delegation of China and thanks it for presenting a comprehensive national report. We commend China for protecting and promoting human rights, especially the unprecedented success in lifting 800 million people out of poverty and developing the world's largest education, healthcare, and social security systems. These are unparalleled achievements. Pakistan also appreciates China's continued commitment to guaranteeing the right to freedom of religion or belief in accordance with the law. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we recommend China to further enhance the synergy between the BRI and regional development programs, further intensify international cultural and religious exchanges, especially through more visits to Xinjiang and Tibet, and continue its leadership role in promoting economic, social, and cultural rights through South-South cooperation. We wish China every success in its fourth UPR. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for Panama.
Thank you very much, President. Panama welcomes the distinguished delegation of China. We thank them for the presentation of the fourth national report. We applaud China's efforts to implement recommendations accepted during the third review, and we'd like to highlight the approval of the law on the protection of the rights and interests of women and the first university specialized in rehabilitation. In a constructive mindset, we recommend that China continue to boost its efforts aimed at combating all forms of discrimination against women and girls during their entire lives through the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We wish China a successful fourth UPR. Thank you.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you.
Paraguay, Mr. Ambassador.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. A cordial welcome to the Chinese delegation and thank you for the report. We are concerned by the situation in certain regions of the country, but we do recognize the approval of the National Human Rights Action Plan 2021-2024. In this context, we have the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the human rights treaties to which China is still not a party. 2, to accept requests for visits from special procedures and to consider extending an open and standing invitation to them. 3, to take into account recommendations from the various treaty bodies and to ensure civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of people belonging to ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities in China. And 4th, to roll out effective strategies for achieving a social protection system without any discrimination. Thank you. I give the floor to Peru. Thank you, President. A cordial welcome to the delegation of China. We thank China for the presentation. We acknowledge the progress achieved, in particular the coverage of the education system, healthcare, social assistance, and poverty reduction. In a constructive spirit, Peru recommends 1, to consider extending an invitation to special procedures for country visits. 2, to bolster efforts to ensure cultural diversity and promote full enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights. 3, to continue developing measures to ensure that the activities abroad carried out by companies that are under China's jurisdiction do not undermine but promote the exercise of human rights. We wish China a successful UPR and hope it will help improve human rights in your country. Thank you.
Give the floor to Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Philippines warmly welcomes China's delegation. We recognize China's strong advocacy for the right to development in the multilateral sphere and laud its determined efforts to operationalize this right domestically, resulting in significant gains in poverty alleviation. We also acknowledge the protection mechanisms put in place for foreign migrant workers, especially in Hong Kong SAR. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that China, 1, strengthen access to remedy mechanisms for foreign migrant workers, 2, expand access to education and healthcare of children, especially those in rural areas with disability and others in situations of vulnerability, and 3, enhance human rights education in the primary and secondary levels. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I give the floor to Poland, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Poland thanks the delegation of China for the national report and its active participation in the UPR process. We welcome the continuous progress made in alleviating poverty in China. Poland offers to China the following recommendations. 1, to ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights as recommended before. 2, to respect the rights to freedom of religion or belief, opinion and expression, peaceful assembly and culture, including for Tibetans, Uyghurs and other minorities. 3, to grant the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the special procedures full access to all regions of China. We wish China a successful review.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Portugal.
Portugal welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for its national report. Portugal commends China for amending the law on the protection of women's right to include a definition of discrimination against women. We recommend that China ratifies the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, adopts a moratorium on the death penalty with the objective of its abolishment, and adopts legislation requiring companies to respect human rights with provisions on the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment and stricter rules on safe working conditions and workplace harassment. Portugal wishes China a successful review. We thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now give Atil Karim Al-Anli, Qatar.
I give the floor to the State of Qatar. Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to welcome the head of the Chinese delegation and thank them for the report. And we commend the efforts in order to implement the National Action Plan for Human Rights for 2021-2025, in addition to efforts to promote socio-economic development in a sustainable manner, raise living standards, and cooperate with human rights mechanisms. We would like to submit the following recommendations. Deploy efforts to establish a national human rights institution according to Paris principles. Second, to promote religious and ethnic rights of all minorities. And third, to take more measures in order to reduce inequalities in living standards between rural and urban areas. We wish them success in this review. Thank you.
Republic of Korea, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Korea welcomes the commendable steps China has taken to ameliorate poverty in rural areas and enhance the environmental rights of its citizens. We recommend that China provide adequate protection to its peers of foreign origin, including the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We also recommend that China respect relevant international norms, such as the principle of the non-refoulement. We further recommend that China consider adopting a national refugee law as part of its effort to implement the 1951 Refugee Convention. Lastly, we recommend that China take steps toward ratifying the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I thank you.
Romania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Romania welcomes the presentation by China of the UPR report and would like to make the following recommendations. To ratify the ICCPR, to establish a moratorium in executions with a view to the abolition of death penalty, to take immediate measures aiming at combating discrimination on any grounds for all citizens of China, including for persons belonging to religious and ethnic minorities, to protect women from trafficking in persons, sexual and gender-based violence, and to take immediate measures aiming at ensuring freedom of association and expression and create a safe environment for journalists and other media workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to Russian Federation.
Thank you, President. The Russian Federation thanks the delegation of China for its substantive presentation of the national report. For decades, Beijing has made impressive progress in the field of socioeconomic development, which has made it possible to steadily raise the standard of living of the population and effectively uphold human rights. Russia recommends to further build the capacity of the judiciary to better meet the needs of China's modernization and its citizens' growing demand for equity and justice, to continue encouraging the organized involvement of citizens in political affairs and to ensure they have the opportunity to actively take part in democratic elections, consultations, decision-making, governance and oversight in accordance with national legislation. And thirdly, to consistently improve the understanding and capacity of citizens to use standard spoken and written Chinese in Xinjiang. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Rwanda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rwanda welcomes the delegation of China and thank them for presentation of their national report. Rwanda appreciates China's completion of 168 goals and tasks set out in the National Human Rights Action Plan and the ongoing efforts to implement the process of National Human Rights Action Plan by 2025. Rwanda further commends China for having built the best social security system, which has provided subsistence allowances for more than 40 million people, allowances for near 5 million, especially impoverished people. Rwanda recommends China the following: consider ratifying the optional protocol to the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Consider ratifying the International Convention on Protection of the Rights of All Migrants, Workers, and Members of their Family. Rwanda wishes China a successful.
Thank you, dear madam. I understand, Mr. Ambassador, that your delegation would like to make some comment at this stage, so I give you the floor.
Mr. President, the Chinese delegation would like to thank all the delegates for their statements. During the second round of response, I would like to give the floor to the Supreme People's Court, Minister of Foreign, Public Securities, Civil Affairs, Housing and Urban Rural Development, Ecology and Environment, and United Front Work Department. I would like to ask them to answer the questions. This includes issues raised during this round of statements and in the advanced questions. Mr. President, I come from the Supreme People's Court. Now I answer questions concerning judicial reform and fair trial. China's courts focuses on fairness and efficiency. For 10 years, we have implemented 130 measures to deepen judicial reform. Concerning judicial justice, we comprehensively and accurately implement judicial responsibility system. We reform the quota system for judges, improve the system for uniform application of law so that judges can render judgments and adjudicators are responsible for the decision. Concerning judicial safeguard, we improve the system for lawyers to practice. We provide defense laws for all criminal cases. For all detention centers and courts, we have the duty counsel stations. Concerning justice for people, we developed the new age Fengqiao experience and developed a system for dispute resolution for equal access for the people and conveniently address disputes. Concerning internet justice in Hangzhou, Beijing, Guangzhou, we have internet court to explore online case hearing for online cases and include the online litigation rules in civil procedure code so that in the internet age, the litigation system advances with the time. China retains death penalty, but we have strict control and judicious application of death penalty. China's legislative justice has strict substantive and procedural provisions so as for their restricted application and reduction in application. I'm from the Ministry of Public Security. I would like to answer questions concerning law enforcement and human rights protection while countering terrorism. We have a complete oversight of law enforcement. We have audio-video recording for law enforcement. The major stages, evidence material, legal documents are circulated online. Through e-tools, we have real-time supervision of the whole process. Meanwhile, we have the platform for complaint. We use reconciliation review, national reparation. We provide remedy to the victims according to the law. We hold people accountable for their faults. We voluntarily accept the supervision of the procuratoriats. We disclose the basis and procedure to the public and disclose the case development to the victim, the family, to receive the supervision of the society. China takes respect and protection of human rights as a fundamental principle for combating terrorism. We severely punish publish terrorist activities and combine it with safeguarding the basic rights and social order. We prohibit discrimination based on region, ethnicity, and religion. In handling cases, we protect the rights of the victims. Meanwhile, we protect the lawful rights of the criminal subjects, including personal right, property, defense, right to complain, accuse, prosecute, etc. I'm from the Ministry of Civil Affairs. Now, I would like to answer questions concerning this area. China actively protect the rights of free assembly. We have 887 social organizations registered. They play an important role for democratic consultation to service specific areas. Take poverty alleviation as an example. We have implemented 90,000 projects, raised 120 billion people, and benefited over 100 million people. We continue to improve social assistance system. Now, annually on average, 40 million people benefit from subsistence allowance, with especially impoverished people accounting to 5 million people. We have ensured that all those people entitled can receive support. We value protecting the rights of specific groups. Now, orphans, on average, receive subsidy amounting to 1,885 and 1,439 yuan. We have established a national basic old age service system. 30 million older people enjoy all kinds of benefits. We develop elderly-friendly society. We develop elderly-friendly transportation service. We address their digital technology problems and develop their education. We have established 55,000 learning centers, cultural facilities, gymnasiums, and we have those tourist sites open to those old people free of charge. Thank you. Mr. President, I'm from the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. Now I'll answer questions concerning employment, social security, and workers' rights and interests protection. In recent years, China enjoys stable employment, and we have achieved adequate employment for 1.4 billion people. Since 2012, the national urban employment increased by 13 million. Last year, it increased by 11 million. China has established the largest social security system. Basic pension insurance, basic health care, unemployment, working place insurance cover 1 billion, 1.3 billion, 240 million, 290 million people respectively. China makes progress in the protection of workers' rights, including women employees, migrant workers, people with disabilities, and platform workers. All of them have equal access to employment and basic public service. Concerning forced labor, China's criminal law and relevant labor laws and regulations clearly provide for sanction against the forced labor. China has voluntarily ratified the 2 conventions on forced labor, which shows China's firm position against the forced labor. It also showcases China's role as a big nation in international labor governance and building a community of shared future. We will continue to work with our social partners, enhance our cooperation with ILO, and implement the conventions. Thank you. I'm from the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development. Now I answer questions concerning right to housing. Proceeding from China's situation, China plays a major role in providing basic housing security. This includes public rental housing, affordable rental housing, and rational affordable housing. The first one is mainly provided by the government. It combines in-kind physical security and rental subsidy. It's for people with housing difficulty in urban areas. Affordable rental housing is for cities with net population inflow. The government provides policy support. It has multiple sources of import and multi-channel support. It's for people who are new residents and young people. Rationed affordable housing is for big cities. It's explored in big cities. Through allotment, it's to provide housing for wage-earning group. Now, China has established the largest housing security system. Cumulatively, we have built 90 million units of affordable housing, which benefited 200 million people. Concerning rural housing security, China, as part of its poverty alleviation plan, has rehabilitation of detached housings. 2013 to 20, China central government provided 18 million support to 80 million people. And China has established a long-term mechanism for housing safety and security for rural low-income groups. Thank you. I'm from the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. Now I answer questions concerning the concept of environment protection achievement. As a major participant and leader of ecological civilization, China upholds the idea of lucid waters and lush mountains as invaluable assets. We enhance ecological protection in all areas. We deepen green, low-carbon development and build a beautiful China. From 2013 to 2022, China's average fine particulate matter concentrate dropped by 57% and achieved the fastest improvement in atmospheric quality. We improve environmental law, ecological civilization, the written constitution, civil code establish a green principle as a fundamental principle. Environmental protection law will establish public participation as a basic principle and has chapters on public information, public participation. We actively participate in global governance, climate change. We led the global drive for Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We safeguard the UNFCCC Paris Agreement targets, principles, and systems. We made a solemn carbon peaking and neutrality promises. We promote the green transformation of industry and structural readjustment. Renewable energy is the largest in scale. Wind energy installed solar energy capacity accounts for 1/3 of the total. New energy vehicle sales account for #1 in the world. I am from the United Front Work Department of CPC. Now I answer questions concerning Tibet. Tibet is one of the 5 provincial ethnic autonomous region or regional autonomous regions. The people elect their deputies. They manage their affairs with autonomy. They participate in state affairs management. They have the right to information and expression and vote concerning local affairs. The public officials account for 70%. Heads of administration are mostly of ethnic origin, which guarantees their important role in public affairs. Tibet is in a plateau. The natural environment is not helpful to economic development. China has a strategy to help Xizang from 51 to 22. The central government has invested in total 1.72 trillion RMB, organized 17 provinces, cities, and 17 state enterprises to provide support to their counterparts in Xizang. Therefore, Tibet's GDP growth rate has maintained at 10%. It removed the absolute poverty in Tibet. It fully shows China's governing philosophy of leaving no ethnic group, no region behind. The Chinese government values the cultural rights of the Tibetan people. Now, Tibet has 1,700 temples, 4,600 monks. Normal religious activities are protected by law. The schools there have bilingual teaching. Tibetan language, now bilingual teachers are more than 30,000. Tibetan language teachers are 8,300. All the government documents, legal documents, newspapers, radio, television, all of those are in national language and Tibetan language. The Tibetan language is very well guaranteed. I'm from the United Front Work Department. Now I answer questions concerning Xinjiang. Xinjiang is in the northwest of China. Like other provinces, it is a place with multiple ethnic groups. Now it has 56 groups with 25 million people. It's a window showcasing China's human rights development. We respect and protect human rights. This mainly shows in 4 areas. 1, we maintain Xinjiang's social stability. We guarantee people's right to life. In Xinjiang, we combat terrorism according to the law. We, to the maximum degree, guarantee basic human rights. For 7 years, there has been no cases of violence and terror. The society enjoys stability and good life. 2, we support Xinjiang's economic development. We improve the material basis for human rights protection. With the support of the central government and other provinces, the Xinjiang area enjoys good economy. In 2022, the gross national regional GDP is 1.7 trillion, which is 1.92 times the 2021 era. 14 prefectures has high level. It has 25 civil airports. 3, we improve people's life, improve social development. By 2022, the urban-rural per capita disposable income was 2.41, 2.2 times the level of 2012. Many people moving into new houses, and we have achieved 3 free health checkup. 4, we develop and protect culture. The Weiwo Mukam art and the Jessica Epic Manner, they are inscribed in the UN list of intangible cultural heritage. We use the national general language system and also use more than 10 ethnic languages. Thank you. Mr. President, now I would like to answer some questions concerning China's ratification of more international human rights instruments, including ICCPR. China has acceded or ratified 29 instruments, including 6 core UN human rights conventions. China values ratifying ICCPR, and we have been promoting relevant legal work to create conditions. The convention concerns the political legal issues of a country, and relevant departments in China, in a sincere and responsible attitude, study the issue. As to when to ratify, it depends on when the national conditions are ready. Concerning concerning suppressing human rights defenses, China is a country of rule of law, and everyone is equal before the law. There's no person, no place beyond the law, and no profession, no identity can be an excuse for evasion of justice. This is the case in all the countries of rule of law. There are certain people under the guise of human rights defenders, political dissidents, and labor rights defenders. They act in violation of law. They touch the red line of law. They are punished by law. This is not because of their ideas or their identity, but because they have violated law. The so-called punishment for political idea, for expression, these are misleading, discrediting with ulterior motive. This fully shows the principle of rule of law, the principle of equality before the law. This is the end of our second round of replies. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of China for its comments and developments, and let's move back to the list of speakers of our interactive dialogue. And then I gave the floor to Samoa.
Mr. President, Samoa extends our appreciation to the delegation of China for their report and welcomes them to Geneva. We commend China's achievement in completing all goals in the 2016-2020 National Human Rights Action Plan and significant contributions towards the implementation of the 2030 Agenda locally and worldwide. Our recommendations are as follows. 1, ratify the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. 2, ratify the TPNW. 3, scale up climate mitigation measures and reduce fossil fuel consumption to ensure that global commitments are met. And 4, continue to uphold the goals and principles of the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. We wish the People's Republic of China every success. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. وأعطي الكلمة للعربية السعودية.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. نرحب بوفد
Saudi Arabia. Thank you, President. We welcome the Chinese delegation and thank it for its presentation. We commend China's commitment to cooperating with international human rights mechanisms. We have taken note of your report and welcome the improvement in education, notably by incorporating human rights education into the curriculum. Recommendations disseminate best practices on the rights of persons with disabilities, pursue efforts to hold the World Human Rights Forum and similar initiatives. We thank you for. I now call upon the delegation of Senegal. Thank you, President. We bid a warm welcome to the Chinese delegation and congratulate you on the presentation of your national report. We commend the implementation of a number of laws in the area of human rights, contributing to strengthening the legal framework for promoting and protecting human rights. We welcome these efforts, and in constructive spirits, we have the following recommendations. 1, consider establishing a national mechanism for promoting equality, dealing with discrimination, including discrimination against older persons, and to write reports on this subject, strengthen measures to protect the rights of domestic migrant workers or migrant domestic workers. We wish China every success in implementing recommendations. Thank you.
Floor to Serbia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Serbia welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China at the UPR session and thanks it for presenting its national report. Serbia commends China for its dedication to the UPR process welcoming its achievement of the poverty reduction target of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development 10 years ago ahead of schedule, its accession to the 1930 Convention on Forced Labor and the 1957 Convention on the Abolition of Forced Labor, the amendment on the law of the protection of human rights to include a definition of discrimination against women, as well as for integrating human rights education into curriculum standards of primary and secondary schools. We recommend China to continue providing public welfare legal services for migrant workers, as well as its effect in combating of human trafficking. We encourage China to continue its active cooperation with the UN human rights mechanisms. Serbia wishes China a successful and fruitful review process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, Seychelles by video message.
Seychelles welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China and recognizes China's efforts in upholding the fundamental tenets of human rights. Seychelles commends the intensified efforts of China towards the implementation of the Open Government Information Regulation on information disclosure to protect the people's right to information and recommends that the necessary resources be made available towards the fulfillment of this commitment. Seychelles further commends the implementation of the National Rights Action Plan 2016-2020 by China and welcomes the 2021-2025 plan. Seychelles wishes the delegation of China a fruitful session and a successful implementation of the recommendations.
Thank you, sir. I now give the floor to Sierra Leone. Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you. Thank you very much. Sierra Leone extends a warm welcome to the delegation of China and to His Excellency, Mr. Chen, the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of China to the UN here in Geneva. My delegation acknowledges and commends China for its extraordinary achievement in eradicating poverty for its 1.4 billion citizens. China's establishment of the world's largest education, social, and healthcare systems is also very highly commendable. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we offer the following recommendations. Continue to formulate robust legal safeguards for human rights for all of China's diverse population and regions. Continue efforts to promote shared prosperity for the Chinese people, ensuring the protection of their economic, social, and cultural rights. Continue efforts to promote build achievements in poverty alleviation, rural revitalization, and prioritize employment opportunities for all Chinese. Sierra Leone wishes China.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now give the floor to Singapore.
Mr. President, Singapore welcomes the delegation of China. We recognize the PRC government's considerable efforts to advance an outcome-based human rights development framework in line with national context. This is a complex endeavor for a developing country of 1.4 billion people. Significant achievements, such as lifting close to 100 million people out of extreme poverty, 10 years ahead of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, should be commended. To further these efforts, we recommend that China, first, continue tackling root causes of poverty, including by developing human capital in rural areas. Second, continue equipping its citizens to harness and enjoy the benefits of digital technologies. And third, continue cooperating with UN agencies such as UNODC to protect citizens against grave transnational threats like the world drug problem. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. I give the floor to Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Slovenia takes note of the national report presented by the Chinese delegation and its commitment to the UPR process. Slovenia would like to make the following recommendation: to establish a moratorium on the death penalty as a first step towards its abolition. We are concerned by the reports on serious human rights violations committed in the Xinjiang region and support recommendations made by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, ILO, and other relevant treaty bodies. Slovenia welcomes the efforts for the inclusion of all children with special needs in the educational system. I thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. Now, Solomon Island by video.
Solomon Islands thank China for the human rights report. We value China's modernization process based on social equity and justice, which offers valuable lessons in the delivery of the UN 2030 Agenda. We acknowledge China's global initiatives to promote human rights and sustainable development. The primary actor in the international system is the state. Therefore, the state has the responsibility to promote and defend human rights. Solomon Islands respects the one China and two system policy and welcomes the chapters of the report on Hong Kong and Macau. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now give the floor to Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Somalia warmly welcomes the high-level delegation of China to this fourth cycle of the UBR Working Group. We commend the importance China attaches to the protection and inheritance of ethnic minority cultures and its further efforts to protect their basic cultural rights. We also commend China's remarkable achievement in advancing its energy revolution and the important contribution made to sustainable energy development globally. In a spirit of constructive dialogue, Somalia recommends the following: continue to promote the energy revolution and build a clean, low-carbon, safe, and efficient energy system to enhance supply capabilities. Pay attention to challenges posed to human rights protection in the digital age and take necessary measures to bridge the digital divide. Somalia wishes China every success in this review. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. I give the floor to South Africa.
Mr. President, South Africa welcomes the distinguished delegation of China to this UPR session. We commend the strides made by China in bolstering the provision of education, social security, and healthcare for all, together with those activities undertaken that seek to address the challenge of absolute poverty. These efforts will no doubt go a long way to improve the quality of the lives of the Chinese people. South Africa wishes to make the following recommendations: strengthen the enforcement of the 2016 anti-domestic violence law, augment the provision of reproductive health services, and ensure victims of hate crimes and hate speech receive the requisite support to facilitate reporting and receive effective remedies. We wish China a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to South Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Sudan warmly welcomes the delegation of China to the UPR fourth cycle. We commend China for its commitment to uphold respect for promotion and protection of human rights, realization of poverty reduction 10 years in advance, building a stronger education, social, and health care systems. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following to China. 1, continue to be guided by the principle of sincerity, real results, amity, to strengthen solidarity and cooperation with other developing countries. 2, actively participate in the formation of the international human rights norms. 3, continue to deepen reforms of judicial system to ensure that people courts exercise adjudication in an independent and impartial manner. We wish the delegation of China success in this UPR cycle. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Spain.
Thank you very much, President. Spain welcomes the delegation of China. We appreciate their participation in this exercise. We recognize the progress made in equality and the protection of women against gender violence. This has come with the law and the protection of rights and interests of women. Spain recommends to China that they, 1, ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and 2 optional protocols. 2, declare a formal moratorium on the death penalty, this as a first step towards its definitive abolition. 3, meet international standards on the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, freedom of expression, and press. 4, establish mechanisms for protecting human rights defenders. Thank you.
Gracias, Senora.
Thank you, Madam.
The floor to Sri Lanka, Mrs. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sri Lanka warmly welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China and expresses our appreciation for the comprehensive presentation made and the progressive measures to further commitments undertaken at the third cycle. We recognize the upholding of the right to life and the right to development as primary basic human rights and adherence to a people-centered development ideology. We also recognize the adoption of policies on freedom of religious belief based on national realities and religious conditions to protect citizens' right to freedom of religious belief, build healthy religious relations, and maintain social harmony. In a constructive spirit, we recommend that China, 1, continues to adhere to the philosophy of people-centered development, safeguards the fundamental interests of the people, and promotes the well-being of people's livelihoods. 2, strengthens the Belt and Road Health Cooperation, including traditional Chinese medicine, and build a healthy Silk Road. 3, continuously improves the management system for ecological and environmental.
Mrs. Ambassador, thank you. I now give the floor to Palestine.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the delegation of China and thank them for the presentation on the latest developments regarding the human rights situation in the country, and we commend their efforts to promote and protect human rights. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. Continued efforts in taking measures to improve healthcare services to guarantee the right to good quality and affordable healthcare to all persons, including marginalized individuals. Continued efforts to ensure equal access to education in urban and rural areas. Continue to strengthen participation in the global human international right governance system and strengthen mutual learning on human rights views and practices. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to Sudan. Sudan, lakum kalima.
شكرا جزيلا السيد الرئيس. السودان يرحب.
Thank you, President. We welcome the delegation of China. China, a sister nation, a friendly nation. We salute the efforts deployed to address education, housing, social coverage, the right of the elderly, and the rights of women. We also hail the accession of China to the Convention on against enforced labor of the ILO. We also recommend that they continue to strengthen the role of civil society, charitable organizations in the human rights field, and to strengthen the institutional structure and cooperation and aid for development with developing countries. Thank you.
No. Suriname, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. The delegation of China thanks them for the presentation today and appreciates the efforts taken since the last UPR. We are taking note of the national report of China and all other relevant reports in this regard. Suriname warmly congratulates China for a successful review and wish them all success in implementing the accepted recommendations. I thank you, President.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Sweden, Mrs. Ambassador.
President, the human rights situation in China, including Hong Kong, is seriously concerning, especially regarding restrictions on the right of freedom of expression and of persons belonging to minorities. Sweden recommends 1. Take urgent steps to fully respect the rights of ethnic and religious minorities, especially in Xinjiang and Tibet. 2. Abolish or reform the use of residential surveillance at the designated location and other forms of extrajudicial detention to ensure compliance with international human rights law. 3. Take urgent steps to ensure that all persons, including human rights defenders, journalists, persons belonging to LGBTIQ communities, and advocates for women's enjoyment of human rights, can fully exercise their freedom of expression and information. I thank you.
Thank you. Je donne maintenant la parole à la
I now give the floor to Switzerland. Thank you, President. Switzerland welcomes the delegation of China, and we make the following recommendations. 1. Bolster protection of Tibetan culture and language in the compulsory education system and authorize the creation of private Tibetan schools. 2. Implement the recommendations of the High Commissioner in the 2022 report on Xinjiang and to undertake inquiries into the scope of the arbitrary detentions that could constitute crimes against humanity. 3. Harmonize all laws and practices used to prosecute human rights defenders with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 4. Harmonize the law on national security for Hong Kong with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you.
Merci, monsieur. أعطي الكلمة الآن لسوريا.
Thank you, Mr. President. We warmly welcome the distinguished delegation of the People's Republic of China, headed by His Excellency Ambassador Xin Shu, and we commend China's firm commitment to the cause of human rights globally and on its initiatives to promote constructive dialogue in this regard. We applaud China for attaching great importance to the improvement of living standards, and we note the increased rates of public spending allocated to projects to improve levels of employment, education, and medical care and housing. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following. First, to continue to pursue a proactive strategy and respond to population aging, and to develop the elderly care programs and services and provide better services for the elderly, and to continue to accelerate the development of rehabilitation assistive devices industry. Thank you.
I give the floor to Tajikistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tajikistan warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of China
the presentation of the comprehensive national report and their continuing engagement in the UPR process. Tajikistan welcomes China's active participation in the implementation of Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 and the implementation of, as well as the establishment of Development Cooperation Fund, which implements projects in developing countries. In a constructive spirit, we recommend the following. 1. Continue constructive cooperation with the United Nations Human Rights Mechanism. 2. Further promote public awareness of the law and enhance the role of law in social governance and citizens' legal literacy. 3. Continue to enhance occupational disease prevention efforts. We wish the delegation of China a productive and successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I give the floor to Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand recognizes China's proactive role in promoting human rights through international development cooperations and commend its efforts in uplifting living standards of its citizens, as well as continuing progress in poverty alleviation. Thailand recommends that China, 1. Further enhance equitable access to quality and affordable health care for all, especially in rural and hard-to-reach areas. 2. Take concrete measures in combating transnational organized crime such as online gambling and human and drug trafficking, including through cooperation with relevant countries and partners. And 3. Continue efforts to provide human rights education and training for all sectors of society. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I give the floor now to Timor-Leste by video.
Commends the progress made by China on human rights since its last UPR. My delegation welcomes the efforts to ensure the enjoyment of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment through various policies such as its green transformation of industry and energy restructuring, and for recognizing the importance of public participation as one of the basic principles of environmental protection and guarantees citizens' rights to information, participation, and oversight. In a constructive spirit, Timor-Leste recommends that China establish a national human rights institution in accordance with the Paris Principle, continue to ensure public participation in the protection of the environment, and continue to improve the gender equality landscape in both the public and private sectors. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.
I now give the floor to Togo. Thank you, President. Togo would like to congratulate China for the implementation of the recommendations from the previous review before the working group of the UPR. Togo also welcomes the adoption of laws aimed at protecting the rights and interests of ethnic minorities, women, children, the elderly, persons with disabilities, and other specific groups. However, Togo would like to recommend, first, to take measures to strengthen judicial administrative protection of all citizens, and 2, to bolster the process of building an environment conducive to a Chinese society that is advantageous and profitable for all social layers in China. Lastly, my delegation wishes full success to China in the implementation of the recommendation of the CPR. Thank you.
Then Tobago.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trinidad and Tobago thanks the government of China for its comprehensive report and engagement in this UPR process. We take note of the progress made since the last review, such as the strengthening of its human rights legislation through the enactment of new laws and amendment of existing ones. The amendment of laws relating to the protection of women's rights and the protection of minors is highlighted. Noting the challenges outlined in its report and in a constructive spirit, Trinidad and Tobago recommends that China continue efforts to address the development and income disparities between urban and rural areas and strengthen efforts to tackle environmental challenges. We wish the delegation of China a productive review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. أعطي الكلمة الآن لتونس سيد السفير.
The floor is now given to Tunisia. I give the floor to Tunisia. Your Excellency, Ambassador, Thank you, Mr. President. My country's delegation would like to welcome the Chinese delegation and thank them for the national report. We commend the efforts taken by the government to implement the previous UPR's recommendations and adopting many laws and policies to promote human rights. We highly appreciate the Chinese government's interest in the issue of employment and adopting a strategy for employment as a priority. We recommend the following: pursue efforts to protect personal information and the human dignity of citizens. Second, to promote oversight on safety in main industries. And third, to continue improvement of legal aid and national judicial aid system. We wish the Chinese delegation success in this UPR.
To Turkey.
Turkey welcomes the delegation of China and thanks them for their presentation. We commend the enhancement of the right to development, notably the progress achieved to alleviate poverty and improvement of infrastructure and access to healthcare services in society, including the ethnic communities. That said, China should continue its endeavors to improve overall conditions of all components of its population, including the Uyghur Turks, with full respect to their distinct identity, religion, and language. We recommend China to uphold and ensure universal human rights, continue efforts towards improving healthcare and infrastructure services in rural areas, strengthen measures to improve the conditions of all vulnerable groups, such as the disabled and the elderly, and guarantee their social rights, work closely on human rights issues with the relevant international bodies. We wish China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to Turkmenistan.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, Turkmenistan welcomes the distinguished delegation of the People's Republic of China and thanks for the detailed presentation for its national report. While positively noting the measures taken by China to strengthening the constitutional, legislative, and institutional framework to promote and protect human rights, Turkmenistan would like to submit the following recommendations. First, consistently implement national programs and plans to ensure the human rights. Second, to pursue efforts aimed at promoting rights of children, women, persons with disabilities, ethnic minorities. In conclusion, Turkmenistan wishes the government of China a successful UPR review. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. We congratulate the delegation of China upon the presentation of her report and commend the government for dedicated attention to socio-economic rights that positively influence the enjoyment of all the other rights. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, Uganda makes two recommendations. One, strengthen national mechanisms to protect rights of the girls and women by including them in political decision-making. Two, continue to strengthen the existing laws and make policies to protect the rights of economic migrants, especially migrants of African descent. Uganda wishes China a successful review. Sheshe.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to Ukraine, Mrs. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ukraine welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for the presentation of the report. We commend China's commitment to the promotion of humanity's common values, which embrace universal and inalienable human rights. In the spirit of constructive engagement, the Ukrainian delegation would like to recommend to implement the goals of strengthening democracy, expanding people's participation in political affairs, and protecting their enjoyment of human rights and freedoms, to ratify all human rights treaties to which it's not yet a party, to cooperate fully with the UN human rights mechanisms, to intensify efforts to prevent, detect, and combat trafficking in persons. We wish China a successful review.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the United Arab Emirates.
To welcome and thank the Chinese delegation for the comprehensive presentation of their national report. We commend the efforts by China to enhance and protect human rights, including ensuring the right to health and enhancing the social security system. We would like to make the following recommendations. One, promote the digitalization of education and building a learning society with lifelong learning for all. Two, continue to optimize the allocation of resources and narrow the development gap between children in urban and rural areas. Three, continue to enhance and develop policies and procedures aimed at achieving the SDGs. Finally, we wish China all success in the spirit of constructive and interactive dialogue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The floor is for United Kingdom. Mr. Ambassador.
There's 4 recommendations. 1, cease the persecution and arbitrary detention of Uyghurs and Tibetans and allow genuine freedom of religion or belief and cultural expression without fear of surveillance, torture, forced labor, or sexual violence, and implement OHCHR recommendations on Xinjiang. 2, repeal the law on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong as recommended by the UN and cease prosecutions, including of Jimmy Lai. 3, guarantee an impartial judiciary and cease harassment of lawyers, use of the death penalty, and residential surveillance in a designated location. 4, cease the restrictions of civil society and independent media and forced repatriations and stop targeting human rights defenders. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci. I now give the floor to the United Republic of Tanzania.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United Republic of Tanzania welcomes the delegation of China to the review session. We commend China for the steps it has taken in promoting and protecting human rights, in particular, for taking measures aimed at improving the free, compulsory, and special education systems, providing needed services for young children and their families, and promoting inclusive education for and facilitation of employment of persons with disabilities. Recognizing that poverty and inequalities have negative impact on human rights, we applaud China for providing development assistance to developing countries, which is vital in developing equal opportunities. We recommend China to step up measures to reduce the gap in development and income distribution between rural and urban areas. We wish China a successful review session.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I now give the floor to United States of America, Mrs. Ambassador.
We recommend that China release all arbitrarily detained individuals, many of whom were named by the UN Working Group, cease harassment, surveillance, and threats against individuals abroad and in China, including Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, cease discrimination against individuals, culture, language, religion, or belief, and forcible assimilation policies, including boarding schools in Tibet and Xinjiang, and torture, unjust residential detention, and persecution throughout China, and forced labor, marriage, birth control, sterilization, abortion, and family separation in Xinjiang, repeal vague national security, counter-espionage, counterterrorism, and sedition laws, including the national security law in Hong Kong, and repressive measures against women, LGBTQI+ persons, laborers, and migrant workers, including in Hong Kong and Macau. Permit the UN unhindered and meaningful access, particularly in Xinjiang and Tibet. We condemn the ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and transnational repression to silence individuals abroad. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Uruguay.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, President. Uruguay welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China. We thank them for their national report. We hail progress made in gender equality and the presentation of the development system for the women 2021-2030. We recommend, 1, to continue efforts aimed at ensuring the full enjoyment of the right to freedom of expression, 2, adopt and implement policies aimed at safeguarding access to education, employment, and health for LGBTI persons, 3, strengthen measures to guarantee the protection of those seeking refugee status and non-refoulement. We wish them the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Uzbekistan warmly welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for presentation of comprehensive national report. We highly appreciate China's consistent efforts to protect and promote human rights, including the political, civil, social, and cultural rights of all citizens. Measures taken in China in a wide range of areas related to protection of human rights demonstrate government's commitments to its international obligations in the field of human rights protection. We especially note the importance of continuing China's efforts to ensure and protect human rights of women and children, including persons with disabilities, as well as development of education and healthcare systems. In conclusion, we wish Chinese delegation a successful review of national report. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Venezuela.
Gracias. Thank you, President. We hail the distinguished delegation of China, and we recommend the following. Continue to their commitment to foreign policy in favor of the common development and global peace, promoting a common shared future, and to bring stability in Xinjiang, and to continue to oppose the politicization of human rights and the interference in domestic affairs in China under the pretext of Hong Kong and Xinjiang, and to safeguard national sovereignty in the interests of development, and to continue also to coordinate the work of maintaining stability and promoting development in Xinjiang. We wish China the best of success in its fourth UPR review.
Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Is for Vietnam. Vietnam, please. Mrs. Ambassador. Is there any technical problem? So we will come back to you, Mrs. Ambassador, with your permission. We move to Yemen by video.
Mr. President, we would like to welcome the head of the Chinese delegation and the members of the delegation, and we appreciate the report. We would like to commend the socio-economic development achieved by China and its determination to protect the rights of its citizens, to provide a dignified life, and this will definitely promote human rights and protect them. We appreciate the interest shown by the government of China in the field of human rights, and we recommend them to pursue efforts to continue cooperation with developing countries by holding relevant conferences and meetings.
Now I give the floor to Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zambia congratulates the distinguished delegation of China on the presentation of the national report and commend the efforts in guaranteeing all ethnic groups equal enjoyment of rights in accordance with the law. We will further commend efforts towards upholding the principles of respectful sovereignty of states and non-interference in internal affairs of member states. We affirm our support for the One China policy. In the spirit of constructive dialogue, we recommend the following: deepen the comprehensive reform of the judicial system and fully implement the judicial responsibility system. 2, strengthen efforts in protecting the ecological environment in light of its interdependence with human rights. And lastly, adopt a unified legal concept of disability that is aligned with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We wish China a successful review. We thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Zimbabwe commends China for its continued formulation and implementation of successive national human rights action plans and the accomplishment of targets and tasks set forth in the 2021 to 2025 action plan. We recommend the following: 1, continue to provide employment support and assistance to all categories of workers without discrimination, effectively advance the reform of the training of industrial workers, and smoothen the career development channels of employees through continuous education and improvement of their technical skills. 2, continue to share research findings and experiences based on China's own realities. We wish China every success in its review. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The floor is for Afghanistan.
Thank you. Afghanistan welcomes the distinguished delegation of China and thanks them for their detailed presentation of their national report. We note the positive measures taken for the development of economic, social, and cultural rights. In the spirit of constructive engagement, we wish to make the following 2 recommendations. 1, observe the international principle of non-refoulement and provide protection to migrants and refugees. 2, as a member of this council, ensure that any engagement with the current Taliban de facto authority in Afghanistan is conditional on respecting and upholding the human rights of people of Afghanistan, particularly the rights of women and girls and other vulnerable groups. Finally, we wish China every success in the review process. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. وأعطي الكلمة الآن للجزائر.
I give the floor to Algeria.
Thank you. Algeria warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of China. We note with encouragement the progress being made by China in respect of the socio-economic development of its people. We would like to make the following recommendations. 1, continue its national efforts to realize social and economic development and eradicate poverty and achieve comprehensive sustainable development for all. 2, continue to promote discussions in the Human Rights Council on the role of development in promoting and protecting human rights. We wish the government of China a successful review. Thank you.
Shukran. And now I give the floor to Angola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Angola warmly welcomes the delegation of China and values its constructive cooperation with Human Rights Council bodies, including by organizing international events towards the promotion of human rights at international level. In a collaborative spirit, Angola recommends China to strengthen measures related to poverty alleviation, in particular for the welfare of older persons, to increase financial and material support to institutions caring for persons with disabilities. Angola wishes China a successful UPR. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. And now the floor is for Antigua and Barbuda by video message.
Thank you, Mr. President. Antigua and Barbuda warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation from the People's Republic of China. We express deep appreciation for China's significant global role in the fight against COVID-19 and commend its efforts in ensuring equal and universal litigation services through comprehensive court reforms. In the spirit of collaboration, Antigua and Barbuda proposes 3 recommendations to China. First, to provide timely updates on China human rights action plans, sharing experiences to advance human rights initiatives. Second, to accelerate the construction of smart courts to enhance efficiency and accessibility in the legal system. Third, to promote smart healthcare and deepen health system reforms for integrated development and governance of health insurance, medical care, and medicine. Antigua and Barbuda sincerely thanks China for considering these recommendations and
sir.
wishes China a successful review.
The floor is for Argentina.
Thank you, President. We commend the delegation of China for the progress made in poverty reduction. Argentina recommends, first, the ratification of all human rights treaties to which China is not yet a party, and in particular, the International Convention on Protection of All People from Enforced Disappearances. 2, continue cooperation with the High Commissioner for Human Rights Office and allow more visits and technical exchanges. This would facilitate the implementation of recommendations from the High Commissioner's Office, treaty bodies, special procedures, and the 3rd UPR cycle. And 3rd, establish a moratorium on the death penalty and consider the possibility of abolishing the death penalty from domestic legislation. Thank you kindly.
I now give the floor to you, Mrs. Ambassador, Vietnam.
Mr. President, Vietnam warmly welcomes the delegation of China. We commend China for the remarkable progress made and wishes China every success with this UPR cycle. We recommend 1, continue to pursue the Chinese human rights development path and take an active part in the international human rights governance. 2, continue to deeply engage in the global industrial division of labor and cooperation and endeavor to preserve the diversity and stability of the international economic landscape. 3, improve the mechanisms for preventing a return to poverty and implement regular monitoring of the population susceptible to a return to poverty. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Armenia.
Mr. President, Armenia welcomes the delegation of China and thanks for the presentation of national report. Armenia welcomes the historical progress achieved in the area of poverty elimination in China. We are happy to note continued expansion of the social security and healthcare systems and recommend to make further efforts towards vulnerable groups, including people with disabilities. Armenia commends measures to enhance gender equality and parity and welcome steps towards increased levels of women's participation in STEM. Armenia recommends to take further policy measures for better education and employment opportunities for women and girls living in rural and remote areas. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Australia.
Thank you, President. Australia recommends China, 1, consistent with the OHCHR and other treaty body reports on Xinjiang and Tibet, repeal legislation and cease practices which discriminate against Tibetans and Uyghurs on the basis of race or religion, cease arbitrary detention, coercive labour transfer and family separation programs, and end restrictions on movement and on rights to enjoy their own culture and language. 2, consistent with Human Rights Committee and special procedure recommendations, including the repeal of the national security law in Hong Kong, we call on China to cease suppression of freedoms of expression, assembly, media and civil society. 3, consistent with the Committee Against Torture recommendation, repeal provisions of the criminal procedure law allowing detention under RSDL and end enforced disappearances. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is for Austria, Mrs. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Austria welcomes the delegation of China and thanks them for the presentation. We would like to offer the following recommendations. cease the destruction of Uyghur cultural heritage and clarify the demolition or damaging of religious sites, as well as Uyghur, Kazakh, and Kyrgyz UNESCO-listed cultural items. Repeal policies to forcibly assimilate Tibetan and Uyghur people culturally, religiously, and linguistically. Abolish Chinese language boarding school systems for Tibetan and Uyghur pupils and ensure the right to education without discrimination, to family life and cultural rights. Take urgent measures to protect judicial independence and rule of law in Hong Kong, and ensure people in Hong Kong can exercise their rights of peaceful assembly and freedom of speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Azerbaijan warmly welcomes the delegation of China and thanks the delegation for the national report. Azerbaijan appreciates China's commitment to the UPR process and positively acknowledges the progress achieved since the previous cycle of the UPR. Azerbaijan commends China for taking effective actions in resolving the problem of absolute poverty, in particular lifting 7.1 million rural people with disabilities out of absolute poverty and providing living allowances and nursing subsidies to more than 27 million people with severe or difficult disabilities. Azerbaijan recommends to China first develop a modern public legal service system that covers both urban and rural populations and carry out intensive activities to raise public awareness of the rule of law, and second, continue the improvement of the psychological service system and crisis intervention mechanisms. In conclusion, we wish the delegation of China a successful review. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The floor is for Bahamas.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Bahamas thanks China for its comprehensive national report and commends progress made since the last review cycle. We positively note China's commitment to human rights, both at the national level, as evidenced in the establishment of initiatives such as the National Program for Poverty Alleviation, and internationally, such as through the Global Development and South-South Cooperation Fund. In a constructive spirit, the Bahamas recommends that China, 1, consider extending a standing invitation to all thematic special procedures of the Human Rights Council, and 2, build on plans outlined in the national report to reduce CO2 emissions before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060 in the collective fight against climate change. We wish China a successful review. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. أعطي الكلمة الآن للبحرين.
I give the floor to Bahrain.
The Kingdom of Bahrain warmly welcomes the delegation of China and thanks them for their national reports and presentation. We commend China's efforts in developing its education, social security, and health sector, as well as its active commitment in implementing the Human Rights Action Plan of China 2021-2025. We offer China the following recommendations. First, continue to implement its National Human Rights Action Plan. Second, further improve measures to reduce inequalities and discrimination against minorities and migrants. Third, continue its efforts to provide stable employment for the poor population. We wish China all success in its review. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I now give the floor to Bangladesh. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bangladesh warmly welcomes the distinguished delegation of China to its fourth cycle of EPR. We commend that China has lifted a significant segment of rural people out of poverty and achieved the poverty reduction target for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. China's progress in expanding healthcare, universalizing education, and affording housing is laudable. In the spirit of constructive cooperation, Bangladesh makes the following recommendations. 1, further improve the welfare service system for persons with disabilities. 2, continue to improve the maternal and child health service system to reduce mortality rate of mothers and infants. We wish China success in its review. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I now give the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Barbados extends a warm welcome to the delegation of China and welcomes progress made since the last UPR. On education, we commend the steps made by China, including the functioning of the national student loan policy to assist families in need of support. We also welcome the integration of human rights into the national school curriculum. We make the following recommendations. 1, we recommend increased efforts by China on the transformation to green industries and continued development of a clean energy system. And 2, we recommend continued support of women's economic empowerment, including through education and employment opportunities. We wish China a successful UPR. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Belarus, Mrs. Ambassador.
We welcome the distinguished delegation of China, and we recommend, firstly, to continue defending common human values, peace, development, justice, democracy, freedom, and to foster a fairer and more inclusive global governance of human rights through the promotion of the concept of building a human community with a shared future. Secondly, to encourage the nomination of Chinese experts and scholars for special procedure mandates so as to contribute significantly to global governance in the field of human rights. Thirdly, to continued management of religious affairs in the Xinjiang on the basis of China's legislation and respect of religious traditions, and to ensure that temples receive sufficient support, financial and other support. And finally, to counteract separatism and foster modernization of the social administration system in Xinjiang. Thank you.
Thank you. Je donne maintenant la parole à la...
I now give the floor to Belgium. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, la Belgique remercie.
President, Belgium would like to thank the delegation of China, and we recommend, firstly, to respond in a positive way to requests for special procedure visits, including in Xinjiang, especially for the special procedure on slavery, the fight against terrorism, freedom of religious belief, and businesses and human rights. Secondly, to ensure that legal measures aimed at protecting national security are strictly defined and in accordance with international human rights law, and therefore revise the security law for Hong Kong. And thirdly, to review the law on the worst forms of crime. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to Benin. Ambassador, you have the floor. Benin would like to commend China on the presentation of its national report under the 4th UPR cycle, and we commend the significant progress made for implementing recommendations from previous cycles. We would like to applaud China's leadership for the rights to development and also the success achieved through the implementation of its national human rights action plans. We recommend China build on this progress by ratifying the Convention on the Rights of All Migrant Workers and their family members. We also note the recognition of a single China and the principle of non-interference in states. Thank you.
Georgia, Mr. Ambassador. Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Georgia welcomes the delegation of the People's Republic of China and thanks for the presentation of the national report. We acknowledge the steps taken by the government to implement accepted recommendations from the 3rd UPR cycle. Georgia knows the progress made towards implementing the poverty alleviation strategy. Georgia also acknowledges steps to extend access to the supporting services, particularly for vulnerable population. We wish the delegation of China a very successful UPR. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And the last speaker on our list for this morning is Costa Rica, Mr. Ambassador.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, President. Costa Rica would like to thank China for its report, and we commend China's efforts to fight poverty. We recommend, 1, to include in law the human right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment, preferably enshrined at the constitutional level. Secondly, to eliminate any excessive restrictions on the functioning of independent NGOs, and thirdly, to establish norms based on international human rights standards about the use of biometric data for facial recognition and cyber policing systems. We wish a successful review. Thank you.
That was, as I said, the last speaker on our list for this session of the morning. And now I give the floor to you, Excellency, and your delegation for your final remarks and comments.
Mr. President, during the final round, we're going to hear responses from colleagues from Hong Kong and Macau, and the State Administration on Religious Affairs, Commission on Ethnic Affairs, Ministry of Culture and Tourism, as well as from Tibet and Xinjiang. They will answer the questions you have just posed, and those questions posed in the written questions.
And concerns on Hong Kong were raised today. However, some of these clearly come from misconceptions and a lack of understanding about our real situation. I'm pleased to explain. No country will watch with folded arms in the face of acts and activities that endangered national security. For those who doubted the need for the Hong Kong national security law, let me bring you back to the darkest time of Hong Kong in 2019. Violent and ransom assaults took place on our streets like never before. Thousands of petrol bombs were thrown. Public property was destroyed. Traffic was brought to a standstill, and law enforcement officers were viciously attacked. Our community was traumatized. Radical forces blatantly advocated Hong Kong independence and sought foreign interference, jeopardizing our nation's sovereignty, security, and development interests. The Hong Kong National Security Law was enacted precisely to tackle this situation, to bring back stability, security, as well as the rights and freedoms which people in Hong Kong have been deprived of during such period of serious violence. Its implementation has played an important role, allowing Hong Kong residents to return to their peaceful and prosperous way of living. Fundamental rights and freedoms, including freedoms of speech and of the press, etc., are guaranteed by the Basic Law at the constitutional level. Article 4 of the Hong Kong National Security Law clearly stipulates that human rights shall be respected and protected in safeguarding national security. Any measures or enforcement action taken under the Hong Kong National Security Law must observe this principle. Many rights and freedoms are not absolute, and the ICCPR clearly states that they can be restricted by law where necessary to ensure national security or public order, or to protect the rights and freedoms of others. As a matter of fact, Hong Kong fully complies with all applicable provisions of the ICCPR and other relevant international covenants. Law enforcement actions are taken strictly in accordance with the law, including the protection of fundamental rights. Such actions are entirely based on available evidence and applicable law, and have nothing to do with a person's background, occupation, or political stance. I wish to make it clear that it is inappropriate to comment on or interfere with the ongoing legal proceedings which were mentioned today. Judges decide national security cases independently in accordance with the law. The suggestion that certain individuals or groups should be immune from legal consequences for their illegal acts is no different from advocating a special pass to break the law. This totally runs contrary to the spirit of the rule of law. It is the legitimate rights and duty of every state to safeguard its national security, and to do so by enacting laws is in line with international practice. In fact, it is our constitutional responsibility to enact local legislation to safeguard national security. The provisions of the Basic Law, including those on the protection of human rights, will be fully observed when we take forward the legislative exercise. Mr. President, the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region Government is firmly committed as ever to the protection of human rights and always seek to make improvements suited to Hong Kong's reality. We have expanded support for women, children, the elderly, the disadvantaged, the ethnic minorities, our imported workers, etc. And we have emerged from challenges with even greater strengths. With the strong support from our country, we will continue to better harness our unique institutional strengths in a new chapter from stability to prosperity. Thank you.
主席先生，我现在回答有。
Mr. President, now I respond to the advanced questions. The Macau SAR has always attached importance to protecting the rights and interests of women, children, persons with disabilities, and ethnic minorities, and has continued to review local laws to further strengthen the legal protection for them. Since the last round of review, the Macau SAR government has revised the labor relations law to increase the number of days of maternity leave and to introduce maternity leave, has promulgated law on minimum age for employees to ensure that resident and non-resident employees have basic income guarantee, has revised the special education system to provide more appropriate support to school-age children, has revised the special security system to relax the conditions for persons with disabilities to apply for the disability pension, has launched the income subsidy scheme for employees with disabilities to promote employment of people with disabilities, and has formulated the regime of prevention and control of minors' consumption of alcoholic beverage to protect children of physical and mental health. On the advanced question raised by U.S., the Macau SAR government has always attached great importance to the comments and recommendations put forward by the different human rights treaty bodies and has carefully studied them in order to follow up on the comments and recommendations that are feasible and conducive to the development of the welfare of residents. The SAR has taken into account the concluding decisions of the reviews and has implemented a lot of follow-up work, such as formulation of the law on the fight against the crime of trafficking persons, the law on preventing and combating domestic violence, the crime of sexual harassment, and a number of ways to increase maternity leave. The SAR will continue to improve relevant legal systems and specific measures to continuously advance the level of human rights protection under the framework of the one country, two systems principle and the basic law of Macau.
问题，澳门特区法律保障外地雇员。
The regional law protect the people. We ensure the principle of non-discrimination so that foreign employees have the same rights, obligations, and working conditions as the local employees.
主席先生 Mr. President, I'm from the State Administration of Religious Affairs. I'd now like to answer some questions on the freedom of religion and belief. Respecting and protecting the freedom of religion and belief is a basic national policy. The protection of such a right is enshrined in the Constitution and laws. Article 36 of the Constitution stipulates that the citizens of the People's Republic of China shall enjoy the freedom of religion and belief. State protects normal religious activities. The State Council has also issued regulations on religious affairs on protecting the freedom of religion and the rights of religious communities, which includes setting up places of worship, carrying out religious activities, setting up theological academies, publishing books, and engaging in exchanges. According to the administration rule, the religious activities of foreigners in China, our government respects the freedom of religion and belief of foreigners in China and their interest in engaging exchanges with their Chinese counterparts. Guided by such a policy, the religious activities run by Chinese believers have made important progress. Nationwide, there are about 200 million religious believers in China, 330,000 clergy, 5,500 religious bodies, 144,000 places of worship. And we have also published many religious books. Thank you.
主席先生
Mr. President, I'm from the State Ethnic Affairs Commission. I'd now like to answer some questions concerning protecting the rights of the ethnic minorities. There are 56 ethnic minorities in China. Under the Chinese law, citizens of all ethnic groups have equal rights and obligations, free from discrimination on ethnic ground. In ethnic minority areas, we practice regional economy. Thirdly, sustained efforts have been made to speed up the economic development in minority areas. Fourthly, we advocate mutual respect, mutual help, and harmonious coexistence under the framework of national unity. Fifthly, we respect the diversity and differences and try to preserve traditional culture while encouraging innovation. Since 2018, we have made unprecedented progress in seeking to protect the rights of ethnic minorities. Thanks to the support of the central government and other regions, infrastructure have been upgraded in minority areas, leading to faster growth in economy and increase in incomes. The university enrollment rates for minority regions is higher than the national average. Now we are seeing in minority areas better housing, better service, social security improvement, and a happy life. Mr. President. I'm from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. I'd now like to answer some questions about protecting the cultural rights of the Chinese citizens. China has invested heavily in cultural service to ensure the cultural rights of all citizens, including special groups. In recent years, we have been improving the legislation in this field and providing better services of culture, benefiting many people, including ethnic minorities, and better protect cultural heritages. Nationwide, there are 46,000 cultural institutions providing services to more than 900 million people. For the past 3 years, the public library networks in China have received 2.7 billion readers. All ethnic groups are covered by the National Intangible Cultural Heritage List. 11 ethnic minority heritage projects have been included into the UNESCO list, which makes up about 26% of the Chinese total. We have also set up 11 national ethnic minority cultural protection zones. Thank you. I'm from the Tibetan Autonomous Region. I'd now like to answer the question concerning the question of boarding school. In Tibet, children from preschool to senior high school go to the nearest school free of charge. But because of its vast expanse and sparse population, for instance, there are only 3 persons per square kilometer. Children need to travel long distances to go to schools. But we are determined to bring modern education to children in the minority areas and offer opportunities for talented children in those areas. Therefore, we have introduced a hybrid model of boarding school plus day schools based on the wishes of the students and their parents. Those in boarding schools can go home on school holidays and weekends, and parents can come and visit them or take them home anytime. They can also call their children anytime. Such practice, in fact, started in 1990s in rural areas of China and was then expanded to other areas based on popular demands. It can meet the expectation for quality education in the ethnic areas and also protects the human rights of the Tibetans and their traditional culture and heritage. Now I'd like to come to the question of so-called forced relocation. Tibet lies on the roof of the world. Its average altitude is 4,000 meters above the sea. Some communities in high altitude are prone to diseases such as high blood pressure and heart diseases because of a lack of oxygen. This also affects children. Based on their personal consent, we have relocated some of them to lower altitude areas more suitable for living. For instance, 30 kilometers outside Lhasa, there is a village called Shiji Jixiang. There are 303 households. 48 households were relocated from the high altitude areas. Before moving, they were invited to have a look at their new homes. Now they have all seen their life improved, with incomes growing nearly tenfold. Now this village has become a tourist attraction. A lot of foreigners have visited the place and praise what they have achieved. Seeing is believing. You're all welcome to come to Tibet and see for yourself. I thank you. Mr. President. I'm from Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. I'd now like to answer a few questions about the so-called forced labor in Xinjiang. Employment is a basic human right in China. Xinjiang encourages free choice of employment based on the demand of the market in line with the government policy to actively encourage job creation to raise living standards. In this way, all people can improve their lives through their own labor. Chinese constitution and laws prohibit forced labor. People of all ethnic groups are free to choose their jobs without any restriction whatsoever. They can decide for themselves where they want to go, what job they want to do, and there has never been any restriction to their personal freedom. The right to remuneration, leisure, holiday, and occupational safety are all protected by the law. There is no such a thing as forced labor in Xinjiang. Now I'd like to come to the allegations concerning the Center for Vocational Education and Training. Those centers are actually boarding schools set up according to the law to de-radicalize those who are indoctrinated by extremism into committing minor crimes. The idea is to educate and help them so as to remove the hotbed of terrorism and extremism. The curriculum of the training centers include Chinese, law, occupational skills, and de-radicalization programs. Trainees can regularly visit their homes and receive visitors and take video calls. After finishing their programs, they are offered job opportunities or can start their own business. The centers provide free lodging and boarding and guarantee the trainees lawful rights in all fields, including their rights for leisure. In October 2019, all the trainees in those centers have finished their training, and most of them have found stable jobs and are leading happy lives. The so-called concentration camp or genocide or crime against humanity are nothing but pure fabrication. Thank you.
主席先生，刚才
Mr. President, just now my colleagues from other ministries and from Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong, and Macau did their best to reply to questions concerning those issues. I think recently some organizations and countries, guided by their political motives, have fabricated a lot of lies on those regions. Some countries have been using the Human Rights Council and other platforms to defame China over those issues. We firmly oppose such attempts. In its essence, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong involves Chinese sovereignty, security, and unity. Now, Xinjiang is enjoying sustained economic development, social harmony, thriving culture, and happy life. 70 years after peaceful liberation, Tibet has seen tremendous changes. Former serfs have become the master of their land and are leading a happy life. After the return of Hong Kong to China, the practice of one-country system has been making a lot of headways. The central government has taken a series of measures to end the violence and chaos in Hong Kong and to bring stability. In recent years, more than 100 countries have openly taken the floor in the Human Rights Council and the Third Committee in support of China's position on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet. This is the voice of justice. We call on those small number of countries to abandon their prejudices and stop politicizing and weaponizing human rights issues and stop interfering in China's internal affairs over the question of Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong. We will stop with our answers at this stage.
Thank you, sir. I understand that there are still 3 minutes and 30 seconds allocated to the delegation of China. So, Your Excellency, Ambassador Chen, I give you the floor for your final remarks.
谢谢主席先生。
Thank you, Mr. President. Just now, the Chinese delegation, in an open and candid manner, had a constructive dialogue with other delegations. Your active participation and positive comments show your interest in China's human rights cause. On behalf of the Chinese government, I'd like to express our heartfelt thanks. We have listened carefully and took note of your statements. Most countries have upheld the principles of objectivity, transparency, non-selectivity, non-confrontation, and non-politicization. And they have acknowledged China's unremitting efforts and historical achievements in human rights. They made clear your willingness to exchange and mutual learning with China in human rights. This is highly appreciable to us. Your many constructive comments and suggestions are invaluable wisdoms from different regions and civilizations and will contribute to China's human rights cause. We have recorded them carefully and will study them carefully and adopt them positively. As for the concerns caused by misunderstanding or misinformation, we are ready to continue having friendly dialogue on an equal footing with the countries concerned to enhance trust, dispel doubts, and deepen mutual understanding. Meanwhile, we regret to note that a few countries groundlessly accuse and smear China based not on facts, but on ideological bias and unfounded rumors and lies. This is inconsistent with the purposes and the principles of UPR. My colleagues have already stated our solemn position on this. We hope these countries will stop politicizing human rights issues, make comprehensive, objective, and fair comments regarding China's human rights development, uphold the UPR's authority and its atmosphere of dialogue and cooperation, and provide positive energy for the development of global human rights cause. Mr. President, through tremendous efforts, China has made historic achievements in its human rights cause. The level of human rights protection, especially the right to survival and development of the 1.4 billion Chinese people, have been effectively increased. The whole process People's Democracy has ensured the constant development of democratic rights, good laws, and good governance have safeguarded the advancement of human rights across the board. The rights and interests of specific groups have been effectively protected. Our development in human rights provided a new alternative for others, especially other developing countries. In independently exploring a path of human rights development, it tellingly shows that there is no fixed path for human rights development, nor one-size-fits-all model for human rights protection. China's path suits our national realities and echoes the aspiration of our people. We will take firm steps towards this path. Mr. President, the Chinese government cherishes its participation in the UPR as an opportunity to have dialogue and exchange and to take in good practice. We are ready to continue constructive human rights dialogue and cooperation with all parties on the basis of equality and mutual respect to learn from each other to make progress together. We are ready to work with all parties for fair and more just, equitable, and inclusive global human rights governance. Finally, on behalf of the Chinese government, I wish to thank once again you, Mr. President, fellow delegates, Troika, the Secretariat, the UN office at Geneva, and the interpreters for making the smooth running